Could members of Toronto East York Community Council please come to Committee Room 1? Members of Toronto East York Community Council, I need one more member for quorum. Okay, I have quorum. If members can take their seats. Councillor Matlow? Councillor Matlow, I need you in your seat. Councillor Wong-Tam, I need you in your seat. Mr. Mahar, if you could let Councillor Wong-Tam go. Okay. I'd like to call the meeting back to order. We could just have a little quiet in the room. Councillor Matlow. So members, before we return to the agenda, if I could just have a little quiet in the room, please. Members, before we return to the agenda, I just want to draw your attention. During the lunch break, you were circulated a new version of the attachment 1 on item 44. That's the list of streets that we're considering for the speed reduction. So if you could just take a look at that before we get to that item. Okay. We now go to item TE 11.5, 1141 Bloor Street, 980 Dufferin Street, and 90 Croatia Street, official plan amendment and zoning amendment application, request for directions report. I have a number of deputants. Bill Bryce. Bill, come on up. Now, you know the deal here. You get your 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I have to change my notes. It said good morning. It's good afternoon now. My name is Bill Brick, and I'm very pleased to address Toronto and East York Community Council today, representing Habitat for Humanity GTA as their senior advisor real estate. I joined Habitat for Humanity GTA in an advisory role in early 2019 after 5 years with Build Toronto and Create TO. During that time, I gained a deep understanding of the great work that Habitat does to develop and promote the cause for more affordable housing in our city. Toronto City Council is to be commended for its support for increased affordable housing, and in particular the Housing Now program currently being rolled out. In the last 5 years, the median income in Toronto has increased 4% beyond inflation, while housing costs have increased by 94% beyond inflation. In the same time, only 2% of the housing built in Toronto has been considered affordable. Therefore, increasing the affordable housing stock in the City of Toronto is a priority for all of us. It is with great pleasure that I'm here today to speak in support of TE 11.5, which includes the launch of an historic $17 million affordable housing trust funded by local developers to promote the creation of new affordable housing for Toronto residents. This affordable housing trust is the unique collaboration between the City of Toronto, Capital Developments, Metropia, the local community group, Build a Better Bloor-Dufferin, Habitat for Humanity, and St. Clair's Multi-Faith Homes. This $17 million affordable trust will help create more affordable living opportunities for residents across Toronto, starting with the Bloor-Dufferin neighbourhood. Of the $17 million, $9 million will be delivered as a cash contribution by Capital Developments and Metropia, and the remaining $8 million will be available through a 10-year interest-free loan provided by those same developers. This nonprofit affordable housing trust can now be used to finance, we estimate, up to 180 new affordable units in the city. It should be noted that the funding for the trust by Capital Developments and Metropia is in addition to the 56-unit affordable housing building and a 30,000 square foot community center, which includes an 8,000 square foot daycare facility, which is being deeded to the city, as this report also discusses. Councillor Bilo and the Bloor-Dufferin community worked very close with Habitat to procure this additional contribution that will not only benefit the local community, but Toronto as a whole. I should add that 50% of the funding must go to support affordable housing directly in Ward 9. The governing documentation to establish the trust is now underway, and an independent board of trustees will be selected to provide governance support and a structure that ensures that the trust accomplishes the goals as set out in the report. I'm also pleased to introduce and acknowledge Joshua Bernard. Joshua is right back there, Vice President Real Estate at Habitat for Humanity GTA, who also worked tirelessly on this initiative. This is a real win for affordable housing in Toronto, and we at Habitat GTA were pleased to work together with the city, the developers, and the community to create this unique vehicle to deliver more affordable housing. However, the real thank you must go to the Bloor-Dufferin community and to Councillor Bilo for insisting that more be done as a result of this development, and to the developers for stepping up and going out of the box to come to this agreement. Affordable housing in Toronto needs more innovative solutions to this real problem. This Affordable Housing Trust is a new idea that will have an impact for years to come. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Community Council today, and I'm happy to be back once again speaking in front of you on this very happy motion. Thank you.
Nice to have you back, Bill. Are there any questions? Councillor Bailão.
Thank you. Bill, I just want to make sure that we understand that this can actually be the beginning of something. So, for example, other deals that happen in the neighborhood could be directing other funds in there. This could actually be the beginning of the trust, and the opportunities are endless.
Yes, I think, Councillor, you more than most understand that we need many forms of affordable housing in the city, not just affordable ownership. That's been a habitat, but we need a significant increase in affordable rental, which the other partner, and this could become a living, breathing entity that other funds are put into. I just spoke with Councillor Matlow a few minutes ago about the need for long-term care affordable housing in the city, really needed. So we think this could grow, and quite frankly, I've already had a couple of phone calls from very important, people that are in the real estate community that have said, how can I be a board member? I think this is a really cool thing to look at.
Great. And the other opportunity that we have with these funds is that it allows Habitat, St. Clair's, and the organizations involved to leverage their existing assets and leverage other funds that other orders of government might have available through the National Housing Strategy and so on. Because I think that as we struck the deal, that was something that was always very present in our mind, is how do we leverage everybody's assets and contributions? Is that correct?
Yeah, as you're well aware, this $17 million is enough to start, but you need all the level of government assistance that we can get, and you need other fundraising or whatever. The unique thing about this is it provides a bit of a walking around fund, because so many times we see pieces of land that come up and people say that would be a great place to do a development that includes affordable housing, but people say we have to fundraise, we have to look for money, and by the time the clock has stopped and the land has been sold on and it's gone. So this provides a bit of a nest egg to work from.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Thank you very much for your time today. Arella Gannon. Good afternoon. Nice to see you again. So you have 5 minutes, and you can watch your time over here on the clock to my right.
Of the Bloor-Dufferin neighborhood, and I have a giant neighborhood mailing list. I'm not talking about this specific arrangement agreement, but I did want to just address the process, because our group, our neighborhood groups have all been engaged in discussing this specific deal for years, and we've put in hundreds of hours because this is public land. And I feel like the process is somehow flawed, because what should end up should have at least as much to the community as we're getting before the deal goes through, and through all the processes. The green space, the community, the access to auditoriums in the school, all those things need to be considered and addressed. And the concept of affordable housing has to become a priority in the neighborhood. And though I'm not talking about this specific deal at this point. I'm talking about the process where community members go to endless community meetings, and I don't feel like what the community benefit at the end merits the number of volunteer hours. And I just want to put an acknowledgement for that. That's my comment, yes.
Hi, I'm Lynn Seepin. I've been a long-term resident of Ward 9, and I'm an engineer retiree. I'm not speaking against the development. I'm in favor of what has come about, but more, as Arella was saying, about the process to get to where we are now. I didn't have any prior knowledge, being an engineer, of the way that city and city planning works and the processes work until I joined this group, Build a Better Bloor-Dufferin, of very dedicated community people, volunteers. But what I've seen now, it says quite clearly to me that too little is being done through the city to get taxpayers their fair share of the value that high density creates for developers. We hear all the time about city targets for affordable housing, plans for community hubs, services and arts and cultural centers, improved playgrounds, increased parkland, but I feel new tools are required if the city is to realize their own targets. I joined the Build a Better Bloor-Dufferin group almost 2 years ago now. However, over 3 years prior to that, at the behest of the city councillor, variations of the group had been collecting neighborhood community input on community desired benefits, which are definitely similar to the city's priorities, and that should be incorporated into what at the time was school public property. About the time that I joined, the community had formed a well-organized volunteer group to inform the city of issues of importance and keep the community apprised of the progress of the development plans. In the steering committee, we are fortunate to have people with expertise in many areas that helped keep us in touch with the community and the city. Other volunteer groups won't have so much relevant experience. Over the course of the next couple of years, we did a lot of work. Keep in mind that most of the committee have full-time jobs. I'm one of the few retirees. We had meetings monthly, then it became bi-monthly, and eventually weekly. We became incorporated so that we could be a party at the LPAT. We held community forums to discuss with the community their needs, and prepared newsletters and a website to provide info and gain input. We attended street fairs, prepared signs and buttons, and met with the city as often as they would agree to meet. Needless to say, we had to hold fundraisers and request donations to keep all of this going. However, despite all this work, I was astounded to find that by the time we were invited to meet and have a say with the city staff and the developers, it was too late to include many of the community's priorities in the plans for this site. We do support the development, especially as it has ended out with the land trust. But it's clear to me now that in order to meet their own targets and satisfy communities' needs for services and health and well-being benefits, the city must have preset tools and processes to ensure that the many density developments already in the pipe include these benefits, and they aren't there yet.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputy? No? Thank you for your time. Sean Mahar.
Thank you. So I'm not here in any way to express anything negative about this development. In fact, I'm here to celebrate the good work that was done here that brought significant contributions that I think are really strongly welcomed by the city, by the community, and by Councillor Bailao. The other reason I'm here is to hopefully help us have more celebrations like that in the future. There are things that this process and this development underscore that can help us do well and gain better community benefits more consistently in the future. One is that in addition to the good work of the city and the staff and the local councillor, the community brought some very valuable roles to the process, but it really wasn't easy. This was an unusually capacious group. There was a lawyer in the neighborhood who helped navigate the legal niceties. There were housing experts in the community who helped decode the intricacies of community benefits. There was actually a bona fide rock star who joined the group and held a concert to help us all raise money. People had the flexibility to put in long hours, as Lynn mentioned, and to help make that happen. And helping good things like this happen shouldn't require such an exceptional circumstance. It would be great if we could figure out a way to systematically support processes like this so we don't have to have planners and rock stars and lawyers and university professors in every community group to be able to produce an outcome that was as robust and useful as this one was. The second thing I want to mention is that this, I think, gives us a really useful local case study. Something good happened here in Ward 9. There were valuable contributions made to affordable housing as a result of this process. And we've always known, in theory, that that was something that we could do. Citywide, at a theoretical level, we have all the studies we need to remind us that there is sufficient profit in the development industry to be contributing a lot more to community benefits than we do right now. The final report on the Section 37 review in 2014 showed us that we're getting about 20 to 40% of the value of increased density, whereas Vancouver gets 70. The inclusionary zoning study that NBLC did last year showed us that we could get about 30% of the units for affordable housing in some neighborhoods and still have a development industry that's profitable. There is money on the table, and if we wondered about whether that played out on the ground, this is a great example, because in a process parallel to the normal work that we do on this, there was another $17 million for a land trust that was able to be brought to bear, showing again that there is capacity there that we can draw on. So let's make the most of something fantastic that happened here. Let's learn lessons from this and spread them to more neighborhoods. Let's ask council to make sure that upcoming housing plans get circulated at the very earliest stages to SSHA and to the Affordable Housing Office, the Housing Secretariat, so that housing becomes part of the very beginning of the conversation about what development contributes to a community. Let's make sure that we're asking council and asking the new housing plan to find ways to get more of the value of development into communities, because as Lynn mentioned and as we saw from all of those studies, that capacity is there. The space in terms of the economics is there, and we should be achieving that. And let's make sure that we're supporting communities to do their best to be a good partner to the city in achieving the city's goals, in creating affordable housing, in creating equity, creating access all across the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Sean? No, seeing none. Maggie Hutchison. Wait a minute, I've
I'm
met
not
Maggie.
But
You're not Maggie at all.
I'm presenting her deputation or comments on her behalf.
Could you give us your name, sir?
My name is Barry Greenwald.
Thank you very much.
As I mentioned, I'm presenting this deputation on behalf of Maggie Hutchinson. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today I do not object to the proposed settlement. I do, however, want to share my reflections on the process that has led to the settlement. I am sharing these thoughts with the goal of improving future developments and future public consultation processes. I am a member of Build a Better Bloor-Dufferin, a residential-led community group that for the past 2 years has advocated for significant affordable housing and community space as part of the redevelopment of the public school lands at Bloor and Dufferin. As one of the co-chairs of the group, I have followed the planning process for the site very closely, participating in whatever possible. Unfortunately, it has been a very frustrating process, one that I think could be very much improved. I first became involved in advocating for community benefits on the site after a meeting hosted by City Planning in early 2017. Let me briefly paint a picture of that meeting for you. It was hosted on the site at Bloor Collegiate in the cafeteria, a very large room. Though it was a cold winter weeknight, the place was packed with residents, all of whom were eager to hear and discuss the developer's plans for this landmark site. There was energy and excited chatter. I believe for some there was even hopeful anticipation, as we had been told that the trade-off for the loss of these public lands would be a large new community hub that would house community services, arts companies, and other valued nonprofits. There were tenants, homeowners, small business owners, parents, artists. All had come to contribute positively, dedicating their time to ensure that this massive development would be a positive one for the neighborhood and for our city. Key shared concerns, I would learn later, were affordable housing, park space, community hub space, and transit. Sadly, the mood by the end of that consultation was frustrated and angry. The presentation and plans missed the mark of residents' concerns altogether. The speakers were tightly managed, and there was no time allotted for public dialogue or feedback. Community members were told to write notes in small groups to submit to city planning. We weren't told when we would get to read each other's notes or engage in any meaningful public exchange. From that time on, members of what would become Build a Better Bloor-Dufferin were given to share our viewpoints with the city, as I understood that even the access we had is rare for a community group. But sadly, even so, the process throughout has echoed that first meeting I just described for you. Despite assurances that we would have an opportunity to meaningfully contribute, it has seemed throughout that we were missing important information, not invited to critical conversations. Perhaps ultimately we had been consulted too late, at a point in the process when things could not be significantly re-envisioned and where nonprofit expertise could not be leveraged. I'm hopeful we can find a more transparent and accountable planning process and urge the city to do better at this. The community benefits that our neighborhood group managed to secure outside of city processes, and that's an emphasis, outside of the city process, have shown the value of community-led input and volunteer efforts. Maggie's recommendations are as follows. Number one, recognize local volunteer residents and nonprofit leaders as valuable participants in planning processes. Number two, publicly share and use the input gleaned from consultation processes. Number three, engage the public before it is too late to change course. Number four, proactively support and strategize with local resident groups and nonprofits about development opportunities, especially when the residents and nonprofits' value align with city goals. For instance, more affordable housing, green space, etc. Thank you. In closing, I just wanted to pass on a comment that I share that I heard from one of my community colleagues. I'm an artist, and artists contribute and make our communities vibrant. Sadly, in this community, in Ward 9, they can no longer afford to live in their own community. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Emily Paradis. Good afternoon, Emily. You know the drill, right?
I sure do. Thank you very much. you very much for having me speak. And like many of my neighbors, I'm here to speak to you about this 7-acre plot of public land sold by the TDSB for private redevelopment in 2016. And like my neighbors, I'm not here today to ask you to vote against the recommendations of the staff report before you. Instead, I'm here to ask you to apply the lessons from this site to the development in our city. I'm co-chair of Build a Better Bloor-Dufferin, a volunteer resident-led group advocating for equitable and inclusive development in the Bloor-Dufferin neighborhood. For the past 2 years, BBBD has advocated for significant community developments from this redevelopment. Our community called for 20% affordable housing, a 70,000 square foot hub, a large public park, and a rebuilt Bloor Collegiate with the same amenities as the current school and large enough to meet the needs of the growing neighborhood. We're proud of our role in helping to secure the $17 million nonprofit land trust launched this week by Habitat for Humanity with funding from the developers of this site. I'm also, in a new old word coined a couple of weeks ago at the National Housing Day celebrations, a proud houser. I've been an activist, frontline worker, researcher, and advocate on issues of housing, homelessness, and human rights for over 30 years. Today, I want to put some of what I've learned as a resident activist into the context of my professional expertise. Today, the Housing Secretariat has announced its new 10-year housing plan for Toronto. And what's really exciting is that this plan is based in human rights. With the leadership of our Deputy Mayor, the plan's anchored by a new housing charter that recognizes housing as fundamental to human rights and dignity, and that outlines the city's obligations to uphold the human right to adequate housing. This is a historic accomplishment that gives us an opportunity to do development better in the City of Toronto. Let's consider what the city's duties are under this new charter and how the Bloor-Dufferin story would be different if it unfolded in the context of a rights-based approach to development. First, the Charter charges the city with the duty to progressively realize the right of every Torontonian to a home that is safe, secure, healthy, dignified, affordable, and accessible. The concept of progressive realization means that through its policy decisions, including planning decisions, the city must show that it's moving in the right direction, continuously improving the housing situation in Toronto, with priority given to those who are most vulnerable. Policy decisions must apply rights-based criteria, putting people's human right to adequate housing at the center. In the case of Bloor-Dufferin, the decision to sell and redevelop this land at no point took into consideration the potential impact of this redevelopment on the housing rights of my most vulnerable neighbors, including the large proportion of tenants in my neighborhood whose rents will now be subject to upward pressures, and the women and trans folks who use the services of Sistering, a 24-hour drop-in center that operates above capacity every single night. Secondly, a rights-based approach to housing requires the city to dedicate the maximum available resources to the realization of the right to housing. This includes funds, but also land and the judicious use of city resources for maximum impact. In the case of this site, we saw 7 acres of public land sold to the highest bidder by Toronto Lands Corporation, instead of reserving this site to meet a vital social need. In the staff report before you, we see that a 56-unit building will be transferred to the city. We also see that through the $17 million land trust, Habitat for Humanity and its nonprofit partners expect to be able to create 180 new units of affordable housing. And it's through the nonprofit approach that they take that they're able to accomplish such a greater volume of housing with the same degree of investment. Third, a rights-based approach to housing sets out effective mechanisms for meaningful rights-based participation by residents in policy process.
Emily, can I ask you for your final thought, please?
Thank you. As other deputants have pointed out, we look forward to a new approach to engaging residents and community organizations in the development process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions of the deputant? Yes, I do. Councillor Fletcher.
Hi, how are you? I'm sure you tried to stop that sale at the TDSB, as we tried to stop that from being closed, that school actually, many years ago. How did that go? Was there any interest, or was it difficult? How long did you work on that?
It has been very difficult. I, in fact, wasn't directly involved in the process leading to the sale because it began so long ago. It was very early after I had moved into the neighborhood. My understanding from my colleagues is that it was very, very difficult. Arello?
Perhaps that person is going to depute. I can ask them. I'm interested in your
She deputed very briefly and is
Okay.
hoping to have the chance to add to her deputation, so.
Are there any other questions?
So you tried, and the
We
school board sold it for, I think, do we know how much they?
What's tragic is now we're looking at, this is only one of many sites, so there will be 2,100 new units in this site alone. Across the street, we're expecting about half as many.
I'm just asking about the school board.
Well, the point
And
is that
that
the
site.
schools are closing, the school board is closing its schools just at a time when the number of students is going to increase.
But this particular site, was it, which schools were on there? Was it
Bloor Collegiate Institute, which will
Right.
be rebuilt and reopened, unfortunately, without the capacity necessary to
Yes.
accommodate the new students.
just Bloor or
And
any other
Kent
school?
School.
And Kent.
Which was surplused and closed.
And where was Ursula Franklin when it was in the neighborhood? Was it in
Ursula
Bloor?
Franklin was in the Brockton School, which
Brockton.
also, that was closed quite long ago. It's the part of the site that the TDSB has retained, and the new Bloor Collegiate is to be built on
I
that
see.
part of the site.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Emily? Emily, thank you very much for your thoughts today. Kim Kovar. Now, Kim, I know you know the rules down here.
I know, you're not going to give me a second more than my 5 minutes.
No, I do not. Thank you.
I won't take the full 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman. I'm really just here for a couple of things. Just don't know how many of you have had a chance to go through the staff report. I'm here on behalf of Capital Developments and Metropia, and I have representatives of my clients with me here today. We're very pleased to be here. It's been a long process. It's been over 3 years working together with city staff, members of the community, our new partners at Habitat for Humanity, under the wise guidance of the Deputy Mayor. This project is clearly going to transform this intersection at Bloor and Dufferin. You can see in this not particularly great site plan detail up here. There are a total of 6 buildings proposed. They range in height from 8 to 37 stories. There's a significant retail and office component proposed as well. The Kent School that has been referenced by a couple of the deputants right now is being conserved and designated under the Heritage Act as part of this process. And the first 2 floors of that building are be converted to a new community hub for the area. And included within that, there's a rendering here which shows the outdoor play space associated with the daycare center, which is being incorporated into the building. As well, I have a couple renderings that I can show you, which include what you're looking at there is the new publicly accessible private street. There's also a public street being incorporated and a large new public park as well being included in the project. The project incorporates a direct underground connection to the TTC station on the north side of the street. There is no weather-protected connection available right now for pedestrians, and that's something else being provided. We've heard a lot about the land trust, the Affordable Housing Trust, which has been set up with Habitat for Humanity. It's an unprecedented contribution coming from my 2 clients in this case. And I think we're all, as a team, very proud of the project that we're here seeking approval for. So I wanted to just end by thanking city staff. We have worked with a variety of staff in different departments over the last couple of years. And in particular, I wanted to give a special shout out to Willie McRae and Kirk Hatcher, who have worked tirelessly on bringing forward this very lengthy report with probably the longest set of recommendations I've ever seen in a staff report. And my client is here indicating they're satisfied with those recommendations and are commending them to you with a motion, which I know the Deputy Mayor is bringing forward. And again, I would also just like to thank Councillor Bailão. Her commitment to this ward and to affordable housing in particular has been very evident throughout this process, and it's led to a better project. Thanks.
3 minutes. Are there
There
any
you go.
questions for Kim? No? Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a deputation on this item? No? Questions of staff? Yeah, Councillor Bailão?
Thank you. We had many conversations with the Toronto Lands Corporation, and we had requested for certain things to be included as this site was going for sale, including affordable housing. Was that responded to us? Was that agreed upon?
Through the chair, yes. We lived through a few years of those conversations. We did ask for inclusion of affordable housing and the provision of community space through Toronto Lands Corporation. They did not provide a response to that, although through the province, there was a contribution towards the community space as part of the land deal.
So if I recall correctly, there was $7 million to build 30,000 square feet?
That's correct.
In using construction costs today, the $7 million builds you 30,000 square feet?
No, it does not.
Does not. Did the Toronto Lands Corporation actually put in their purchase and sale that the rest would be made up from Section 37 from the city?
No, they did not. I don't believe in their letter they did. They required a minimum or a maximum of 30,000 square feet, which was to be finished, but I don't recall specific language.
I think.
They did.
Go ahead, Willie.
I'll just clarify that the last comment, the TDSB did say that any deficiencies to the fully built 30,000 square foot hub would be funded by the city through Section 37.
Correct. Yep. So we started going to the community about 3 years ago once the site was sold, and we were planning a series of working group sessions. Is that correct? With the planning, and we asked to put together a working group.
That's correct. We had several working group meetings.
And then we were asked by the community to slow down because they wanted to organize themselves, and we did that. Correct?
That's correct. We had them weekly and we slowed them down.
And did you meet regularly with the community group, the nonprofit housing providers, and the whole team to get to this agreement that we have in front of us?
Yes, typically our meetings involved yourself, city planning and other city staff, as well as the community group and the developer.
Compared to, how long have you worked in the city, Kirk?
I've been with the city since '99, planning since 2013.
Was this an application that you said had a considerable amount of community involvement or no community involvement, or what do you think?
In my experience, it had a considerable amount, yes.
Okay. Part of the, we talked about the land trust, but we're also having 56 units of affordable housing. Are those limited to some time, or are those in perpetuity?
The 56 units are secured to be conveyed to the city in perpetuity forever, so we'll own the building and the
So
units.
do you have any idea of what kind of affordability we'll be able to get on those units?
Well, through discussions with the community and with other groups within the city, other city staff, we decided that smaller units would service a certain population or demographic. So we're looking at smaller units, and 56 of them would fit in that building of 8 stories.
Is it fair to say that we're expecting less than 50% average market rent on these units?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And the connection to the subway, is that responsibility of the developer as well?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Fletcher?
I just want to clarify that the section 37 and what the school board's requirement was in their sale, and given the length of time between selling it and building something, did they not anticipate the cost would rise? Did they not make accommodation for that? And they actually put in their purchase of sale that it would be covered by somebody else. I'm quite shocked by that, and I'd like to hear more.
So I can't speak to the agreement of purchase and sale because we haven't been privy to those details, but I can tell you when the RFP went out for the land transaction, that it was intended that a community hub would be built by the developer and that the province would make a contribution towards that hub.
This was when, and the province would make a contribution towards that hub,
Correct.
but it was the developer's responsibility.
That's unclear. So the premise is that a hub would be provided with this development upon the land sale transaction occurring. I don't want to get too into the details, but the premise is that the hub would be provided, the province would be contributing, and then the city could potentially fund any deficiencies associated with the full realization of the hub.
So there was no anticipation. The hub program was one of the Ministry of Education, is it not? Yes?
I believe so.
There was a special
There
advisor.
was a hub, yeah, there was a hub secretariat to my knowledge.
Hub secretariat under the Premier, I think, in order to create hubs at schools. And this was, has there been any other ones? Or I think this is kind of the one in a development from those times.
This is so in the earlier conversations before the developer came into the picture, we did work with the Hub Secretariat. You're correct, reporting directly to the Premier at the time.
Pardon me?
And
It's very hard to hear you, sorry.
Sorry, the Hub Secretariat did report directly to the Premier.
To the Premier.
At the time. This was the only one, it was a bit of a test case, it was the only one that we are aware of in Toronto.
So this is the only one, the pilot. And how much are we aware of? There was no obligation through the hub to fund the hub. Fully funded hub.
No, there was not. The city, as Councillor Barlow, Deputy Mayor Barlow has mentioned, we had requested that through the province, 100% of the funding of the hub be provided. However, that was not, ultimately, the province did not agree to that.
No, I understand, but I'm just going like this. School, provincial, hub, secretariat, premier, establish a hub, negotiate a hub, and they're not paying the full cost. Do I have that right?
That is correct.
And it's in the RFP that there has to be a hub because there's a hub secretariat. And then they didn't fully fulfill their financial obligations for this hub.
That's correct. The request for proposals required up to 30,000 square feet as community space be provided within the development, but not that it be fully funded by the province.
Fully funded through their hub program.
That it would not be fully funded through.
Would not, and they were clear in that.
They
They could have.
Yes.
They could have easily, as their first hub, funded it. Correct?
One would have hoped, yes.
One would have thought. Thank you. And what's the sale price? Do we happen to know?
I don't believe that information is public, to my knowledge.
You don't think it's public? And those dollars, you might know Regulation 444, or whatever the new number is. Somebody might know that. Do those dollars go to the province and then back to the school board, or do they directly to the Lands Corporation? Do they have an obligation to the province with the sale of property? Nobody knows.
Sorry, we don't have the answer to that. We can try and find an answer for you,
Yeah,
Council.
before council, that would be helpful to understand if the province reaps anything from a land sale, because it's their legislation that's being used to, for the land sale.
We'll have that before Council.
Are there any other questions to staff? No? to speak. Councillor Bailao.
Thank you. I do have a motion with some technical amendments that staff have asked me to put forward. And the community has been dealing with this site at least for 10 or 11 years. I think the first few meetings I've attended, it was probably about 11 years. I wasn't even elected. I live in the neighborhood, so I was starting to go to those meetings at that time. And it was about school closures, and so we've gone through all those processes of closing schools and relocating kids, and then it came to what to do with the site. And there was lots of ideas what to do with the site. Actually, the city did put in a letter of intent with the Catholic School Board because we were interested to jointly buy the site. It was not approved by the Ministry of Education at the time. We put in the request. We said we wanted to keep this as public land. And we were basically, the door was shut in our face and say, go off to this working group with the Hub Secretariat, which the city staff and myself spent a lot of hours, a lot of time, and at that table constantly we asked, please don't put up this site for sale without any conditions. Make sure that this is a city building exercise when you go out to the market, that there is affordable housing requirement, that there is the hub requirement, that these requirements are incorporated in the way that you sell the site. Well, the site was put up for sale with the $7 million contribution from the province for a hub. And for the last 3 years, the reality is that the city needs to look at this as a site that has been sold. And so we've been working with the developer and the community. Very disappointed at how these lands were put up for sale. Actually, I was on vacation this summer, and it was quite interesting when I read that the Toronto Lands Corporation was actually starting a new way of dealing with these sites. And I wrote to them and I asked them, what has changed in the legislation that now allows you to do things differently from what you did at Bloor-Dufferin? And I basically got the runaround, didn't get much out of that answer. But it's good that they're at least understanding and recognizing that the community and the city and everybody could get a lot more if the sites are put up in the market in a different way. 3 years ago, planning did go out to the community with the developer, and we were bringing together a working group, and the community basically asked us to slow down, and because they really wanted to organize, and that's how Build a Better Bloordale was kind of formed with people in the community. And since then, we have been working on with planning, and later on in the process, we actually brought Habitat and St. Clair's to the table to help us really put together the affordable housing component, which was something really, really important for everybody. Was it frustrating? Yes, it was frustrating. It was frustrating because as much as we say here that, you know, this is Toronto TDSB land and we are the city and we really, you know, we have to look at this as, you know, private land, which is now owned by a developer. It is hard when the community looks at it and sees public schools in there where they went to school, where they played soccer, where they have their park, and to tell them that is not public land. I understand the frustration. The Planning Act does have certain limitations. So when the community would come and say, we want a bigger park, and we would say, guys, they fulfill all the obligations that we have. And people will say, but this is public land. And I said, I understand, but that time has passed. And then we started really focusing on this idea of the hub and the affordable housing, and starting to narrowing our priorities. And I think that bringing the nonprofit sector to the mix, I think it was crucial, it was imperative. And I think that we are here today, and I put some thought into this because we had a few ingredients that were right. We had a lot of challenges. It was extremely frustrating. I think that a lot of us felt that it was not fair, the situation that we were put in, the hand that we were given to play. But I think when you look back and I see this was only possible because we had 4 things to play with. One was the perseverance of the community. They were persistent. They focused on the need for more affordable housing, and I think having that pressure was important to focus everybody and to get that going. The ingenuity and the innovation of the sector was essential, and Habitat and St. Clair's, I can't thank you enough. You really made this land trust. This was your idea. You put it on the table. Everybody believed in it. And I think this is great work forward, and kudos to you. The third was actually having a developer that wanted to get to a yes, and that saw this as the beginning of a relationship. They see this as they're just starting the relationship with this community, and they're going to be here for a number of years, and they wanted to start it on a good foot. I got that. And then the fourth, I have to say, and as much as some people complained about, you know, the process and the planning in this, we had an incredible supportive team at the city, because the amount of time that they spent and what they've allowed us to explore. You know, many people could have been around the table and say, this is not possible, I'm not doing this, we need to move forward. And every time I would go to them and say, let's slow down, let's give a little bit more time, you know, Habitat is talking to the residents, let's slow down, give me a little bit more time. They were open to this. They were open to let us explore these things, and I think they need to be recognized. And when we needed to have them put the foot to the pedal, because we had an agreement and let's make sure that it goes through and have the report through, they came through. And so Kirk and Willie and planning and housing, that also allowed us to explore, and the housing secretariat and the developer really reached out to the houses, to Habitat and so on, to bring them to the table. I think that once you put all these ingredients together, that's why we are here. I think there's lessons. I think that absolutely we want to make sure that the opportunities are created in other developments, but I think having these 4 ingredients made a really, really bad situation actually come out with some pretty cool stuff, and something that I think we can be proud of. And obviously there's a lot of work ahead of us in shaping all that community, but I think that we're off to a good start. And I am really excited about the opportunity of the land trust and all the other impacts that it can have, not only on this development, but across our ward as well. So I hope I can get your support. And again, big thank you to the residents, to staff, to the sector, and to the developer for, you know, agreeing to come to a yes.
Thank you.
Usually it tells people not to clap, but
I'm actually kind of relaxed about that. There we go. We'll
Okay.
do this as well.
you're good.
There you go. Are there any questions of the mover of the motion? No. To speak, Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I'm just going to say congratulations to everybody, and this was obviously not an easy thing to come to, extremely complicated, a very complicated situation, including the revelation about the RFP. And I have to say that the community has been active around this site, well, since I was a trustee sitting at 155 College Street when they made a decision to close Ursula Franklin. With all the kids that went to Ursula Franklin and the very special school it was, and move it way out to Western Tech, change the school completely and vacate the site. And that happened in 2001. That's 18 years ago, people. And this is only now coming to fruition. What a mess the education system is in once it was taken over by the province and by Mike Harris. And just for the record, all you great folks from Davenport, the vote was 12-10 to close Ursula Franklin and move it. And myself and Councillor Carroll, who were there, we all voted against that, and we stood up constantly against school closures, particularly ones that were very important in the neighborhood and should be there. So I'm very familiar with this provincial legislation and the Regulation 444. It really should be called Regulation Sell, 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 to just get rid of all the property possible, even though you still need school sites. In all these areas in the city, Councillor Perks, Councillor Bailao, my area, that are part of the mid-rise guidelines with so many new apartments and condos coming on side, schools are now putting out portables. And in areas where schools were sold, now there's portables. This is not the education system we ever dreamed of. When the ham-fisted requirements came down for the Harris government and schools were taken out of the jurisdiction of municipalities, and the great relationships that we had between the school board and municipality, and turned that into a vertical relationship with the province, funded on square footage for students. So the caretaker's room, the gym, the pool, the principal's office weren't considered part of teaching space. And I see people nodding. I'm talking about this because this is only the end of a crazy-making, ridiculous approach to education that we've lived through. And by the way, today there's a strike on. We are still living through that crazy time. So I was at many meetings as well, my role as councillor, around a hub. We had them everywhere across the city. There was so many. There was a hub person hired. It was under the premier. We're having hubs. We've got to have hubs. Hub, 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 hub. And numerous meetings with the United Way, with Social Planning Council, probably with the city. It was constant about getting a hub. And now today I find they negotiated a hub and then didn't put the bloody money in for the hub. Now that's pathetic. And we're trying to make up for all of this ham-fisted, poor policy that has been in the education system, and that the Toronto District School Board, I didn't know Toronto was a district. I thought we were a city. But apparently, according to the province, we are the District of Toronto with our own school board. So I just think that this has been a very difficult time since the day Ursula Franklin closed till the day that this application is done. And I know many of you are on that, and I know how hard Councillor Bailao has worked to try to take all these crazy pieces and come up with something that's manageable, workable, and find some money, because the province short-shrifted this city and this community on its obligation for a hub. So I never want to hear anybody talk about provincial hubs anymore, because that's not good. I just want to say as well that the whole thing about a land trust, that more and more these ideas that are very exciting and really new, emerging formations in the city around housing. I want to congratulate you all on creating that, on bringing that in and putting it in the mix. We have Parkdale with a land trust. There'll be a land trust around the single-family homes when TCHC finally turns them over rather than sell 600 homes. And so out of this mess, we've created quite a few exciting things, including that. And so I just want to say, job well done in an exceedingly difficult situation. And there you go. Perhaps we'll get back to a proper education system and better relations between the city and the province in the nearest future possible. Thank you.
Okay. To speak next, Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to say also a thank you to Councillor Bailao. I think she itemized the 4 different components that were critical in making this this application come to a positive place in facing forward. But she actually did not thank herself, and I recognize that as I read the dates on this report and the 49 recommendations, and even with the amendments, I am very confident that not just the councillor but the councillor staff would have done a lot of the heavy lifting in the office to make sure that that she was able to balance the various conditions that were placed before her. One with the sale of the TDSB land, one with the developers need to extract profits, and then to balance the needs of the community. And under all of that are a framework of provincial planning policies and what have you. So I just want to acknowledge the councillor in her role and in her leadership, and also to recognize recognize that this is not the first time, and it certainly won't be the last time, where the City of Toronto and local communities have been subject to things that have happened to them, especially when it pertains to land sales through other orders of government, perhaps through disposition through school boards, whether it's Catholic or public. And it's never a good place to be. A good place to be is when you're actually proactively working together to come under one umbrella to meet those broader legislative as well as city objectives. But that doesn't seem to always be the case as different divisions and different ministries work in silos. And it always puts the community under tremendous pressure, city planning that have to respond under the Planning Act, and then the local councillor's office that's trying to, make a situation move forward. And that process is even further complicated by the Ontario Municipal Board and now LPAT. So however you decide to sort of analyze it and unpack the process, and there could be a lot that is said, but this is not an ideal way for us to make informed land use planning decisions at the end of the day. And I know that in my own ward, in Ward 13, we had a situation where the residents literally marched onto Queen's Park. We demonstrated with signs. We literally took down a fence that was encasing a parcel of publicly owned land bounded by Wellesley, Breadalbane, Yonge, and Bay Street. Like literally, my Bay Street residents physically took down and cut the fence to occupy that bit of public space, and all they were ever looking for was a park at that point in time. But the provincial government would rather keep a fence up and do nothing with the land for literally 15 years before they ultimately decide to sell, to the great opposition of the local community, the local councillor, and then we were then left with the very unpleasant situation where we had to negotiate with the developer to swallow a lot of density and then to buy back and to contribute public dollars to buy back from the developer who purchased the land from the province to assemble a park together. Our win is a 1.6 acre park called now Dr. Lillian McGregor Park, but that was a very complicated situation, a very compromised process, and we tried to make lemonade out of lemons. So I just want to commend everyone by way of participating in this process. I know these are not the conditions you would have want to walk into and say, let's build a dynamic and viable and sustainable inclusive neighborhood together, but we are working under much bigger, more complicated contextual planning environments, and you move through it with a lot of sophistication. Clearly, you were highly innovative and motivated, and I think that it actually came together because of all those four factors that Councillor Bailão listed, including the fact that she herself and her leadership helped shepherd this across the finish line. So thank you. I want to add those comments there.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
This is probably going to reiterate some points here, because I just want to make sure that we repeat them enough times. But this is, I kind of see this as the case of making the best of a bad hand. We were dealt a bad hand. The Toronto Land Corporation didn't and doesn't have a mandate to uphold the public good, to build affordable housing, to build parkland. It's about monetizing assets. We've heard that language in our own city of Toronto bodies as well. So we should be very, very, very wary that when we're designing agencies to deal with what is the original public trust, the government taking on the public trust of these lands, or land trust, the original land trust in us as an institution, that when we put monetizing value and we're not very specific of what you also have to deliver, you end up in a situation like we had with Build Toronto for years. When we weren't actually getting the affordable housing, we had negotiated through a side deal because it wasn't written in those original articles of incorporation. For years, we had no action from the provincial government on inclusionary zoning. Zero. A decade of massive growth in the city. This is on a major transit node. We could have guaranteed 20% affordable housing 10 years ago for this site. Again, because of provincial inaction, nothing. And now this government, backpedaling on the commitments from the previous government, which were tough enough to achieve, and that was the original delay that meant that it couldn't happen on this property. We weren't able to secure that. Instead, we've got to go through, we have to have the community help us get it through the back door. The Ontario Municipal Board, or the Land Tribunal, back to the Municipal Board, like, call it what you will, we're now back to the same rules that stack the deck in favor of the developers. So if the city just says, no, we don't want it because you're not giving us affordable housing, the developer knows that if they spend enough money, they can just go to the board and get whatever they want. It's a bad hand. And it's about to get a whole lot worse, right? The community benefit agreements, the changes to the DCs, it's going to get worse. We're going to have less ability to come up with arrangements like this that try to make up for the lack of municipal and community controls in our land use planning. Less power for communities and municipalities in this new world order, this new Ford world order. Now, one thing that I thought was particularly innovative in this that I hadn't seen before, and I have since had a briefing from the Affordable Housing Office, because I'm certainly going to be looking to it more, is the use of development charges, the money collected from development charges. Because there's a development charge reserve fund that was used to fund some of this affordable housing. And I've never seen it used in what was Ward 19, and now Ward 11. But we had opportunities to use that money, and I'm surprised that it didn't come to the table. Because when I have developers saying, oh no, the open doors policy just isn't enough, we can't make it work, it's making it work right here. And so I think we've got to start using that money to the best of our ability, that reserve, affordable housing reserve fund from the development charges. So like kudos to the local councillor, to city staff for putting together a plan. But most of all, a big thanks to the community for not letting it go, and for pushing and pushing and pushing and doing some heavy lifting and coming up with this new land trust model. I'm so sorry that you need to even do stuff like this. Like, the government is in that role to be the land trust. And if you look at Toronto Lands Corp, if you look at Build Toronto and what the city's done, we haven't done a job to give a ton of confidence to the community that's fighting for affordable housing. We haven't done a good enough job. I would love, as we've heard from the speaker, I would love to think that this new housing plan changes things in one iota. I would love nothing more. But there's no new money in this plan. There's asks to other levels of government. There's no appointment of a housing commissioner to actually hold individual projects to account, and I don't even think that would be the actual mandate of that housing commissioner. I don't think, because of the planning rules the way they exist, they would be able to do anything any different. And if status quo is all that we're able to achieve, and we look at a development proposal like this and we can say, how would this be made better under what we have proposed, and the answer is realistically not much, and maybe it actually is worse, I think that's something we need to really put some consideration to moving forward. That's me being generous in my final comment, but I'm happy that this has landed in a good place, a better place than it was, and I look forward to seeing what this land trust does in the future with the endowment that this brings to them.
Okay, I'd like to say a couple words. So at the heart of all of this are two things. The first thing is that in Ontario particularly, but in Canada generally, the rights of property speculators trump the rights of the community. And in Ontario, frankly, is the worst jurisdiction in Canada and possibly in North America. in terms of the balance between the rights of land speculators and the community at large. And, you know, kudos to everybody who worked on this, that we were able to get anything out of this. One thing that makes me quite sad, though, is that there's a little bit of, in that arena, there's a little bit of disagreement that emerged between the various stakeholders, saying, you know, you didn't do a good enough job. No, you didn't do a good enough job. No, it's that, you know, we've been tossed into an arena and told to fight over scraps. That's planning law in the province of Ontario. And I know that all the actors here are people of goodwill, and in a couple of months or weeks, when we've all had a chance to digest the scraps that we got, we'll all feel better about working together again. But I do think that's one of the things that made me quite sad watching this one move forward, that the culprit, which is the worst planning law that I'm aware of in North America, got away. But the other thing that's at the heart of this is an act of theft. When I was a little bit younger than Councillor Cressy, there was a sign at 155 College.
155.
155. They were such sunny days being that age. There was a sign on the headquarters of the Toronto District School Board that said, entirely funded by Toronto taxpayers. Some of you might remember that. Mr. Mahar might remember that.
And many of the pools still have a sign.
Yes. And it's worth remembering that the province of Ontario did not put a dime into the operation of the Toronto District Schools. The construction of schools, the maintenance of schools, the education of kids in those schools was paid for entirely by Torontonians. And here we are in a moment when a piece of provincial legislation said, we're going to take that asset that this community funded and we are going to monetize it and give it to a private interest that can speculate on it and build for-profit housing. It is staggering. It is staggering. It's worth remembering that the history of provincial assaults on the City of Toronto is not a recent thing. It is a long, long-standing problem. I mean, you know, I've always sort of kind of wished we had a provincial party, the Bloc Toronto, or something like that. But I think that when we have an item like this in front of us, it's worth remembering. We have the worst planning laws on the continent, and the province of Ontario steals our assets. If we are going to build the kinds of communities that we want to raise happy, whole, well-rounded people from all walks of life in, these two circumstances must be met. We must get the province of Ontario to recognize that the people who live here have at least equal rights to the people who want to monetize here. And we have to get the province of Ontario to stop stealing things from the people of Toronto. Thank you. Councillor Bailão has moved an amendment. What I'd like to propose is we do the amendment, and then I would like to record the vote on the item. So on the amendment, all those in favour, opposed, carried. On the item, all those in favour. Councillor Cressy, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Bailão, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Perks, Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor Layton, Councillor Matlow. That's unanimous, and it's all members present. Thank you. Okay. So I believe we had one little item left before we go to the, or is it right to 35?
We have 6, right?
6. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So item 6, Councillor Bailão, before you run away. Yeah, we have to do the intention to designate. Yes. Yeah. So item 6. This is the heritage. Hey guys, Bloor-Dufferin gang, don't go away. This is the intention to designate.
Move staff recommendations.
All those in favor, opposed, carried. Okay, I also now have 2 new items of business to introduce, 1175 and 1176. Can I have a motion to introduce? Councillor Cressy. Good. So I'm going to suggest we just take a moment of quiet and let people filter out and have their conversations so we can hear the next round of deputations.
They deserve to.
Yeah, just 30 seconds while people make their way out. Mr. Mahar, if you could, Sean, take your conversation outside so we can get to our next piece of business. Emily, Maureen, Nochidel. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I would like to call item TE 11.35, residential on-street permit parking status update on the expansion of on-street permit parking in the Toronto East York Community Council area. I'll come back to it. I've called this one already. So members, the clerks, there was inadvertently a misordering of the people who came, registered to make deputations. So we're going to begin first with William O'Henley. Bill, come on up. Sure. Okay. So, Bill, you have 5 minutes, and you can watch your time on the clock over there to my right.
Okay, thank you for hearing us. My name is Bill O'Henley. Can we turn all the speakers on? Thank you for hearing us. My name is Bill O'Henley. Everything we're saying here is already in my submission sent last Friday. We have 4 requests of Community Council. Number 1, Transportation Services in its November 26th report on this item says that permit parking requires a more balanced and strategic approach across the city, that a report on that is due in early 2021, that future decisions on permit parking should hold off until then. The current permit parking approach is a temporary Band-Aid solution with inconsistent application ward to ward. We ask that Council vote to defer the permit parking extension until that work is done in 2021 as recommended by City staff. Let Transportation Services do their job, then consider these changes. Number 2, that Council and City require that condo developers in future build 1 parking spot for each condo unit plus adequate parking for retailers in each development, and that each new condo development be a separate permit parking area to ensure adequate parking without dumping condo owners onto surrounding streets. Number 3, if Council does not defer permit parking, that it amend permit parking motion that it does pass to exclude the streets in Ward 4 as was done in Josh Matlow's Ward 12, so that that area continues to have resident petition and polling provisions of the current permit parking bylaw until 2021, or that it implement polling as was done in Brad Bradford's Ward 19. Number 4, if Council does not defer permit parking and does not agree to remove or poll the streets in Ward 4, that it amend any permit parking motion it passes so that in permit parking area 1H on Ward 4 map in the November 26th report, which is this guy here, if residents of any street submit to the city a petition with more than 60%, that's a supermajority, in favor of opting out or converting to street only versus area permit parking, that street would be opted out or converted automatically, as requested within a reasonable period after the city has verified that the petition is proper. Why do we ask this? In old Ward 13, now Ward 4, we feel misled by Councillor Perks on permit parking. Other wards followed a robust consultation process explaining the current bylaw protections and the proposal to amend it, soliciting feedback and reporting the results and staff answers to resident concerns. None of that was done in Old Ward 13. No effort was ever made at the June or September community meetings to inform or solicit feedback as required in TE 27.49 or respect the consultation process used in other wards as set out in TE 7.78. Notification of the first meeting was poor. Most found out by word of mouth. At the meeting, we were kept in the dark. Current bylaw protections and the intention to eliminate them were never even mentioned. Councillor Perks told us that permit parking had already been approved in East York, and thanks to Doug Ford, we were now stuck with it. And there was no legal avenue to oppose it, or to provide feedback, or whether we wanted it or not. And no point sending a petition, since even if every person on every street opposed it, it's a done deal. We could only comment on which streets we would suggest go with which streets. I find that very interesting, given the comments that were just given on how important community consultation is. We feel that this attempt to push through Ward 4 permit parking without allowing his constituents to know about the bylaw and his push to amend it is just wrong. When we met with Councillor Perks on November the 15th, we raised all this, but he said it doesn't matter. He technically held 2 community meetings and got resoundingly negative feedback, even though he did not raise the bylaw issues at all, nor allow discussion of them. Even if he publicly dismissed all our feedback as invalid, which he did, he says that it was sent to city staff, so technically he is on side. For him, even if more people knew the facts, even if every person at both community meetings did not want permit parking, it would make no difference. Councillor Perks feels that permit parking is a good idea.
Can I ask you for your final thought, please?
Final thought. Final thought.
Oh, so the public meetings that he held were an empty sham.
Next,
Jane.
Is Jane?
Jane.
Good afternoon. Councillor Perks stated at that same November meeting that he has no problem pitting himself against the interests of the majority of his constituents. He said he had done that before and will do it again, even if it's all constituents on all 86 streets. He'll decide what's right, and if we don't like it, we could always vote him out. We ask that the Toronto East York Community Council recognize and reverse what we consider to be a trampling of bylaw rights of constituents in the old Ward 13 portion of Ward 4 by considering the motions we are making. If not, then City Council should be asked to, if it gets a say. So why don't we want permit parking imposed? There are many reasons. Here are at least 4. People have received advice from local real estate agents that permit parking could negatively impact their property values by adding congestion due to increased parking, which affects snowplows and garbage trucks and emergency vehicle access, causing additional traffic that normally would not even use the street except to find permit parking spots, and eliminating the children-friendly and elder-safe nature of these streets, qualities that justified the higher prices paid by residents for these homes. Permit parking may add value and appeal to properties on high-density streets in a traffic-heavy grid, where many people have no driveway and therefore need permit parking to enhance quality of life and house values. But for our low-density streets, where people already have a driveway and don't require as much street parking, and where traffic is limited, it detracts from the quality of our street and the value of our properties. Our streets become a cheap parking lot for distracted drivers from higher density streets looking for an overnight space. Since most residents of these added streets already have driveways, a parking permit on their own street will cost 3 times as much as a resident of a neighboring street without a driveway. So permit parking brings no benefit here to residents of these streets. That's why these streets are different and should be able to choose.
Condo real estate agents have advised prospective buyers not to worry if there is no available parking in the condo, since cheap on-street permit parking will be available. We are concerned that we will see increased overflow parking from Bloor West condos, especially future condos where the city is allowing developers to build less than one parking spot per unit. We see condo developers as primary beneficiaries of adding this huge cheap parking lot, as it will reduce developer building costs and increase what they can charge for a spot, while dumping overflow condo parking demand onto nearby city streets. That's why we propose that council require every new condo to build a parking spot for each unit and appropriate spots for any retailers in the building to satisfy all demand for parking. Any spots not taken should be available to rent to help soak up demand on busy permit parking streets, and that each condo development should also be its own permit parking area. These changes should be made whether or not permit parking is extended. Thank you.
Are those all your remarks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? No? Next, Lee Steinmans.
I'm Lee.
Steinmanis, sorry.
I'm Lee Steinmanis. Why should this community council reconsider across-the-board permit parking on the 86 streets in Old Ward 13, now Ward 4? We feel it will be a money-losing proposition on our 86 streets. The projected revenues of permit parking in the April 1, 2019 report are overstated. Streets across the city that have managed to escape permit parking should be removed from projected revenues. The 25% take-up assumption is too high for our 86 streets. Most residents on those streets don't need permit parking, and most of these streets ramble far away from the grid streets that need permit parking. Ward 4, Area 1L, will generate virtually no permit parking revenues. Meanwhile, the fixed costs associated with permit parking are about $6.2 million up front, with annual costs of almost $500,000. Permit parking is unlikely to pay for itself here. Council can reduce those fixed and variable costs by removing those 86 streets as requested in our fourth motion. Better still, the November 26th report says that the whole permit parking matter needs to be revisited with a more balanced and strategic approach. Don't rush this through now. Let transportation services do their job. Council should approve our motion to defer this until a more strategic and balanced approach is decided in 2021 as recommended by city staff. Councillor Perks says that this is an equity issue, that people 2 or 3 streets over have to pay for a permit, but we don't. First, the higher values of homes on those 86 streets and the higher taxes paid on those values take that into account. Also, homes with no driveway get a property tax discount. More importantly, if someone from another street decides to park overnight on our street, they run the same risk of getting a ticket as we do. So there is no equity issue here. Residents are happy with the 3-hour rule. Permit parking introduces 2 inequities. A person without a driveway 2 streets over can get a permit parking spot in front of my home 24/7 for 1/3 of what I would pay for that same spot. Second, whereas other wards in TEY got a robust communication and feedback opportunity, Old Ward 13 didn't. That is extremely inequitable. Councillor Perks keeps telling us that this is being driven by some waiting list, but on November 15th we asked where the demand is. We didn't want addresses, just some objective measure. He would not tell us. A signed petition done this weekend showed that on my street, Palisades, there is no demand. Of the 33 households, 28 responded, and of those, 96% opposed permit parking. In the absence of objective evidence of demand for permit parking, we and you need to ask who benefits from this effort. Not residents, not the city. Perhaps saving condo developer costs? Then that is not an equity issue. On November 15th, Councillor Perks referred to you, his fellow councillors, as cowards for agreeing to listen to their constituents when making these decisions. He said permit parking must be applied across the city. We pointed out that it will be handled differently in each ward, so it will not be applied consistently. Ward 4 is pushing through permit parking in Old Ward 13 without consultation other than on boundaries. Wards 10, 11, and 13 are going to full consultation, and Ward 19 is repolling. This inconsistent approach represents a disparity in the treatment of Toronto residents. The February 2019 consultation summary recognized the concern that permit parking will turn streets into cheap parking lots for neighboring streets. It responded as follows: the only people who would be able to park on the street would be people who live on the street and or their guests. This is the main purpose for having a permit parking program. We asked Transportation Services, could we ask for street-only permit parking or opt out where our street has a driveway for each home and we see no benefit from permit parking? They said we have the right to petition and to opt out or convert, but that would go to Councillor Perks. We asked Councillor Perks if he would block such a petition. He told us on November 15th that even if every household on any given street or on any street filed such petitions, he would block the petition from going to this community council for a consideration.
Thank you.
Therefore,
That concludes
abuse
your
of
time.
power.
Richard Kirsch.
That's me. I'm also a resident of Swansea. Councillor Perks is planning to create a new, large and cheap 86th Street permit parking lot in Ward 4, which will attract even more cars to the area by encouraging people in the area to buy additional cars because parking's easier, creating more pollution. How will this reduce Toronto's contribution to climate change? Several people have told us they met with Councillor Perks separately, but any arguments they made, such as those we've mentioned, were simply dismissed, as they were at the 2 community meetings, including the fact that many residents, including myself, of the 86 streets in Old Ward 13 were still unaware that this change to bring in permit parking is even going on. Councillor Perks told us on November 15th that he will propose amending the bylaw to remove the current petition and polling provisions and push permit parking through. To summarize, we recommend that, first, this council should vote to defer the extension of permit parking until a more strategic and balanced approach is decided in 2021, merely a year away, as recommended by staff. There is nothing urgent about more permit parking. Second, this council should pass a resolution that condo developers be required to build 1 parking spot for each unit, plus adequate parking spots for retailers in the development, and that each condo development should be its own permit parking zone. Third, given the poor communication of the bylaw and the process, and Councillor Perks' threat to block any valid petition to opt out or convert to street-only permit parking in Old Ward 13, that if Council does not defer permit parking, that it amend any permit parking motion that it does pass to exclude the streets in Ward 4, as was done in Joshua Matlow's Ward 12, so that the area continues to have the resident petition and polling provisions of the current permit parking bylaw, or that it implement polling as will be done in Brad Ward's Ward 13. This could occur before signage and other costs are incurred so that these costs could be averted where the street clearly wants to opt out. Councillor Perks has said no to that. No one opts out as long as he is councillor. And lastly, if and only if this council still passes a motion to impose permit parking in Ward 4, council should include a provision that allows residents of any of these 86 streets to opt out of permit parking or to convert to street-only permit parking in Ward 4 Area 1H. If 60% sign a petition to that effect, and that street would be opted out or converted automatically. Councillor Perks would get permit parking installed on every street where there was no such objection, and only those streets with the 60% supermajority would be allowed to opt out or convert, as other streets across the city can. Thank you for listening to us today.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the deputy? No? Next, I have Sue Harper.
Thank you for listening.
Stu? No? Nelson Wong? I know I saw Nelson. Hi, Nelson, come on up. You all settled? So Nelson, you'll have 5 minutes and you can watch your time over here on the clock. To my right, on that wall. See it?
Right.
Okay. Go ahead.
My name is Nelson Wong. I'm a former architect and, would you believe it, city planner for the City of Toronto Planning Department eons ago. I'm retired and I live at 14 Brule Gardens. I'm here to oppose the November 16th report and the proposed recommendations of the Director of Transportation Services. Specifically, item number 1 regarding the proposed area boundaries on street parking in Ward 4 in Attachment A in L1L zone. This is my area and where I live. That is, we do not want permit parking on my street at Brule Gardens, nor our immediate Brule neighborhood. And I have a map here which shows what that neighborhood is. This is the gate entering the Brule neighborhood, and this is Brule Gardens, this is Brule Crescent, this is Riverside Trail, which dead ends here, and this is Brule Terrace with Wonder Street going out. This is an entity on its own with the Humber Pond to the west. We have an extreme drop here between Riverside Drive and the streets on Brule Crescents. So this is a distinct geological entity. Now, at one time, and I think this is unique in that it's one area. My point is that this area has always been a unique area without permit parking. We have lots of natural terrain, animals, and kids playing on the street. And we are quite satisfied that we do not need permit parking for that fact that every one of the houses has 2 or 3 parking spaces in our driveway. We have 3 hours parking on the street, and we've lived with this very happily up to this point, and we do not see the need for any change. And in fact, if it were to be allowed for permit parking, it would in fact compromise our so-called outdoor living room space. It's an area which is unique to Toronto, and we don't see that we should compromise it with parking to destroy what we have as a natural environment with people only. The other issue is the glaring contradiction between the city and the transportation policies. The overriding city policy is to the city's climate action plan transform Toronto by reducing local greenhouse gases emissions by 80% from 1990 levels by 2050. Is this overriding policy not contradicted by the City Transportation Service Department policy of thrusting more cars via permit parking across our neighborhoods? Is their car-oriented policy not creating more air pollution, global warming, and climate change? Should the city not restrict the use of cars and instead create a neighborhood street for walking, bicycling, and playing? This is our outdoor living area. In closing, Brule Garden is such a cluster of unique pedestrian-oriented streets. We wish to keep it that way. I hope that the Toronto and East York council members will listen to us by not passing any motion for this unfortunate transportation report recommendations that would compromise our unique Boulevard and community streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. Are there any questions? No? Margot Duncan. Oh, is Margot not here?
Yes.
Yeah, there, I thought I saw you. Hi, Margot.
The area I'm speaking about is this area in the northwest corner of the ward. Councillors and staff, my deputation is respecting Ward 4 recommendations, and specifically the area identified in Attachment A to the 26 November staff report as 1K. In the summary, it states that a request was to review proposed boundaries in Wards 4, 9, and 14, but in Ward 19 to review the feasibility of polling all streets. Please ensure that permit parking is only imposed if a poll has been completed on the street or in the neighborhood, no matter what ward is involved. In the recommendation, it states that they are to be received. Please clarify received, and if that means no action be taken, please adopt the recommendations and receive this report. In the financial impact section, it states that there is no financial impact. Is this because the recommendations are to receive so that no permit parking would be implemented, therefore no financial impact? In October 2017, Transportation Services report to undertake on-street parking field surveys. It does not state that staff should evaluate the necessity of imposing permit parking in these areas, nor the will of the residents to have this system imposed on their neighborhood. Please add a requirement to meet with the unique communities and determine the need to impose permit parking on them. Although I understand the need for permit parking in many areas, especially the downtown and older areas, I lived on Maitland and in Yorkville and know well what a nightmare parking can be. And I also know that it is not necessary in our area of the New West portion of Ward 4. I am concerned that the imposition of this will encourage developers to continue reducing parking on site for their residents. Communities should not have their timber altered because the city allows or requires developments to underbuild parking while not increasing public transit. The report states that staff were to ensure that the process to determine appropriate area boundaries for wards 4, 9, and 14 includes analysis of proximity to natural divides. In Ward 4, there were 2 public consultations at which the response was resoundingly opposed to the imposition of permit parking at all and to the proposed size and boundaries of the staff-recommended permit parking areas. At the last consultation, I raised the natural divide in our area, a significantly steep ravine between Humbercrest Boulevard and Gooch Avenue. It's about a 150-foot drop over about 100 feet. It's significantly steep that TTC would not run a bus route on it. I asked that if permit parking were to be imposed, that the 1K area be divided so that our valley remained as its own permit parking area. This seems to have fallen on deaf ears as the 1K area includes both these streets. Please redraw the boundaries should permit parking be imposed on our area and ensure that the east boundary of our area be the east side of Gooch Avenue at the ravine. The 26 November report states that Council exempt the implementation of permit parking on the streets in Attachment B from the municipal code requirements for permit parking, including both the petition and polling requirement. This would mean the requirement to petition and poll would be waived in wards 4, 9, and 14 for the locations listed in Attachment B. I had no streets listed in my Attachment B. If my assumption is correct, I ask councillors to include the streets in the west portion of Ward 4 to this exclusion and to amend this recommendation to ensure that polling is not waived but is required. Again, should permit parking be imposed on our neighbourhood, please recognize that the proposed areas are geographically too large and not homogeneous. Please realign the 1E area to be from Humbercrest Boulevard to Runnymede and Annette to Dundas. This area is geographically homogeneous with sufficient traffic signals to cross Janes Street if needed. Leave the Warren Park community as its own area. At the end of the covering report, the section on permit parking moving forward suggests that future decisions regarding the implementation of on-street permit parking should be held in abeyance until the citywide parking strategy study is complete and a report is brought to City Council. I request that any permit parking suggested for the new west side of Ward 4 be held off until the citywide parking strategy is complete and significant local specific community consultations have been held. Additionally, I request that the permit parking areas be smaller, homogeneous, consider future development impact, and not be considered until polling has been done in each recommended permit parking area. Our city is made up of unique, interesting, and inviting neighborhoods for many different reasons. Considerations of these features should be paramount when council considers imposing new citywide programs on neighborhoods. It isn't necessarily a matter of how much property tax we pay. It is the work each neighborhood does to keep its identity and to keep it an attractive place to live, work, and raise our families. I believe that simply because our neighborhood has been moved to a different community council, it should not be subjected to programs that the residents are clearly opposed to. One size fits all does not work in all cases, and in this case it fails.
Can I
We
ask
know
you
our
for your final
neighborhoods,
thought,
we know
please,
how they
Margot?
work, and what changes could destroy our unique living spaces, the things that attracted us to buy or rent our homes in our communities. Community council and council should respect the opinions of residents and work more closely with them when programs like this are to be imposed. Thank you for your
Thank
attention
you.
to my deputation.
Are there any questions? Councillor Fletcher.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Welcome back.
There is kind of an unwritten rule. I'm wondering if you are still aware of it, because I know you worked in East York for a long time.
I actually worked here.
Pardon? Yes.
Actually worked here, yeah.
But for an East York councillor, correct?
No, I actually worked for the city clerk as the manager of council.
Oh, I'm
then.
sorry. I thought.
Way back, decades ago.
Way back. I thought you worked for Michael Prue.
That probably before you were born.
Did you not work for Michael Prue?
I did after that.
Yes.
Oh, at Queen's Park or here?
I worked for him here and at Queen's
Oh,
Park.
so you worked here for a city councillor.
And,
All right.
yeah.
So thank you. Good. And just, it's my understanding that there really is no enforcement of the 3-hour rule. Are you
Actually,
aware of that?
in our neighborhood, we do get tickets, yes.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And in ours is, an odd neighborhood, it's sort of like out of the way, so.
But are you aware of an unwritten rule at East End that just ticket the permit parking and leaves the others? There's not that many overnighters,
No.
overnight parkers? You've
I
heard
mean,
of that?
we don't get it all the time, but we certainly do get people who park overnight or over the 3 hours certainly do
do,
get
eh?
tickets. It's not all the time.
Oh,
No,
okay.
Of course not.
Thank you.
We don't have the parking enforcement staff to do that.
Oh, that's right. There isn't.
There isn't a lot, there aren't a lot of them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Any other questions? No? Margot, thank you for your time. Tula Alexopoulos. Hi, Tula. So you have 5 minutes, and you can follow your time on the clock over there on the wall to my right.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee. I'm Tula Alexopoulos, resident of 24 Brule Crescent. Along with Brule Gardens, Brule Terrace, and Riverside Trail, these streets make up Brule neighborhood. At the outset, I want to acknowledge that I appreciate that permit parking is an essential program and service. We need permit parking for streets and areas where there is poor or no on-site parking for residents. I also appreciate that there are complexities and differing views on this subject, but I'm here today to kindly request that councillors respect the democratic process. The residents of the Brule neighborhood are strongly opposed to permit parking. A petition opposing permit parking was signed by 118 residents representing 73 households, which represents 80% of the households in the Brule neighborhood. And I think if we were a little more persistent, we probably would have gotten 100% opposing it. The petition was delivered to the clerk's office on June 6th of this year in response to the permit parking item on the June 25th meeting of this council meeting. The petition noted that permit parking is not needed nor desired by the residents of the Brule neighborhood. It expressed concern that permit parking will change the stable and unique physical character of the Brule neighborhood that is bordered by natural divides, the Humber River and marshes to the west and south, the reverse ravine to the east, and Bloor Street to the north. The Brule neighborhood is an enclosed enclave with no through traffic and a single road access. Increasing traffic and parking cars raises safety concerns for residents and their families because of the lack of sidewalks in our neighborhood. and it will have implications for services, including emergency vehicles. And it may also have implications for the deer and the other animals that are frequent visitors to our lovely neighborhood. I am humbled to live in such a lovely neighborhood, surrounded by nature, and I feel obligated, along with my Brule neighbors, to defend its stability. And we're very, very pleased to see in the November 26 report that Transportation Services staff are developing a citywide parking strategy. We agree with the recommendation in the report that future decisions regarding the implementation of on-street permit parking should be held in abeyance unless considered urgent, until such time as the citywide parking strategy is complete and a report is brought to City Council. Now, given the significant opposition on-street permit parking in the Brule neighborhood, as well as other neighborhoods in Ward 4 that were formerly residents of Ward 13 and excluded from the earlier consultations and study, there is no urgency to approve the proposed permit parking area boundaries in Ward 4 or approve the licensing of local roadways within the boundaries of the permit parking areas. In the absence of a citywide strategy, it is concerning that councillors are exercising inconsistent and unequal treatment of residents across the wards in the Toronto and East York district. We noticed that streets in Ward 12 that currently do not have permit parking have been removed from the list of streets to be converted to permit parking. Also, councillors are considering the feasibility of polling all streets in Ward 19 to determine if the residents wish to have permit parking in their road or area. It is unacceptable to permit or extend the democratic process to some residents under similar circumstances and not to others. We respectfully request the same treatment as the residents of Ward 12, or alternatively, have the streets in the Brule neighborhood polled to determine if the residents wish to have permit parking. In conclusion, I would like to say that permit parking should not be imposed on neighborhoods that do not need or want permit parking. We remain firmly opposed to any action that would change the status quo or eliminate or waive the requirement to petition and poll for residents in the Brule neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tula. Are there any questions? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Veronica Wynn. Hi, Veronica.
How you doing?
I'm well, and you?
I'm brilliant. Okay. Okay.
Just settle in.
Just get myself.
Now, I know you know the routine here.
I know the ropes, yes, unfortunately.
What is that ding?
Pardon?
I'm hearing a ding. It's Kristen, okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Wong Tam. Please mute your phone. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and the reason that I'm here, I'm Veronica Wynn, the president of the Swansea Area Ratepayers Association, and I've been working with the group to help them guide through the process of getting their message here. But my concern, our concern here is kind of more ward-wide or even city-wide, because that's what we have a perspective. We also have a history of working very positively with transportation services to alleviate the problems in Ward 4, you know, that have been egregious to the point of we have designed solutions and things like that. So we are not unknown to be cooperative. But in the agenda that was posted for today, it said 2 recommendations which referenced the boundaries. But in the report, which an item that concerned us is number 2 here, which is could potentially be, it's a recommendation that that in the Ward 4 that the polling and petitioning would be suspended or exempt, they would be exempt, and that permit parking would be applied to the whole to all the streets in the ward, and which leads us to, because we are a very unique, especially in Swansea, we have every attribute of zoning, every zoning attribute you can imagine. So we have concerns that, first of all, that polling would be eliminated, because if the permit parking is applied to the whole area, well, then why do you need to have a polling thing? Because you know, you don't have to ask for it, you've already got it. So, and secondly, the petition would be futile, because we have been told that, you know, if we have a 100% request for removal of permit parking from the street, it would not be respected. So just to show you the issues around, especially in particular, I give you two areas that it says these are all the streets, and they talk about the length. I don't know whether I can enlarge this here, but anyway, it talks about two streets called Windermere Place, which is actually 79 metres, but long, but it's just about the length from that wall to this wall. So and the bus route goes up there, the school bus goes up there, and the garbage truck goes up there. Windermere Avenue between the Lakeshore and Queensway actually goes under a bridge, and it is said it's 159 metres long. So that that's going to be under this total permit implementation. It's going to be there. So we have to be vigilant, because we have no polling and we've no petitioning to remove it. I just show you a situation about this is what we call the perfect storm of traffic problems. Because there's actually because of the parking situation on this side of the road here, the bus that comes up Windermere Place from Southport, it has to turn. These has to wait to turn until these cars get away, but they can't get away, and they have to go up on the curb to get out of the way of the bus to let them through. But then you see there's the school bus coming along, and then if you look down there, there's a green truck, and that's the garbage truck. So when they all converge, it's absolutely chaos, and it's like a parking lot coming down Windermere. But yet, under this total permit installation, we're going to be in this sort of difficulty to have to explain that. So, and to be vigilant about saying, no, that should not be in there. So what we will do, and what I'm going to do, is make sure that I work with Mr. Filippetti, is it Filippetti? And Mr. Waddell. So we will be working with him the minute we know what kind of resolutions are coming up here, or what motions are going to be passed, and we will make sure that we go through all these streets, and we reserve the right to be able to do that.
Up there, okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? No? Janice Calder. Good afternoon, Janice. Thank you for being so patient today.
The last one.
No, there are a couple more.
Oh, are there? Oh.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Janice Calder. Thank you for allowing me to speak before the council. I live on Brule Gardens, but I felt it wouldn't be right for me just to speak for my own area, so I'm going to speak for all 86 streets in the old Ward 13. I've pondered this and tried to understand what's going on. I'm fairly new to Toronto. I was born and raised here, but I was 35 years in Calgary, and I just came back. So I've been back close to 4 years now, and I can't believe what's going on in Toronto. Anyways, I fail to see why we must have permit parking on the 86 streets that were added from Old Ward 13 to make new Ward 4. Many of these streets are isolated enclaves in areas far from the main grid of streets. I am arguing for the democratic approach of polling and petitioning, which is in the current bylaw. Even if these streets are grouped into zones, they should be given the right to choose whether or not they want permit parking using the petition or polling method as outlined in the bylaw. To install, maintain, and enforce our 86 streets with permit parking would be more costly than leaving them as is or just letting those that want permit parking have it. The money saved would be better spent on improving our transit system, which is climate friendly. Toronto has declared a climate emergency. We need to start addressing this matter. The low cost of permit parking only encourages more cars. If people live close to transit, that is subways, streetcars, buses, which most of us do, shouldn't we be discouraging and decreasing the number of cars? We seem to be doing two contradictory things at once, talking about decreasing the number of cars while increasing the number of cars. Who needs transit when you can go by car? Toronto is Car City. We need to have other options that will address our parking needs. There should be studies and reports on this for us to consider. Another point, we will be destroying the character of many streets by turning them into parking lots when it's not needed. Streets are more than just roads for cars to get from one place to another. They bind neighborhoods and neighbors together. We have a vested interest in the safety and appeal of our roads. Noise, traffic, and pollution are harming our health and is only getting worse as the city grows. These 86 streets from Old Ward 13 should have the right to decide whether or not they want permit parking, zone or no zone. Our 86 streets are still reeling from being suddenly made a new ward without consultation and then forced to have permit parking. And I just want to say, my neighbor told me I should say this, I love animals. These areas that are going to be converted or that you want to convert to permit parking border on parks and marshes and rivers and ravines. You can see how they are. They're sort of on either end of Swansea. And we have abundant wildlife, beautiful wildlife, and the wildlife doesn't know roads. They just cross from one ravine to another, and, you know, I worry about people who don't know the area coming in, and they wouldn't know to watch for skunks and chipmunks and deer. We feel we're custodians of these areas because we've lived there. I haven't lived. My parents moved in 1958, and I've moved back into their house. But I know the area very well. So I just hope that you will consider not having permit parking for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Seeing none. The final person I have listed at present is Karine Dumoulin. Karine, hi.
Hello. Last but not least, it's been a long day. My name is Karine Dumoulin. I live on Bridgeview Road, which is part of the former Ward 13, in a little pocket here called the Old Millside. I'm here on behalf of the Old Millside Residents Association. Our community does not currently have on-street permit parking. We have not asked for it. We don't want it. We don't need it. This view has been repeatedly communicated to our new councillor. However, our concerns have not been addressed. That's why I'm here today to appeal to you, the councillors of Toronto East York community, that you listen to us and that you continue to allow us to exercise our rights, to have a democratic say, and to have the right to polling and petitioning as it pertains to on-street permit parking. Permit parking has been delegated by City Council to community councils because there are so many important local considerations that have to be taken into account. The polling requirement was put in place to ensure that local residents have input on permit parking on the streets where they live. With the larger wards that are now in place, councillors need local feedback more than ever in order to be responsive to their constituents' needs and concerns. Removing or subverting the right to petition and polling is unfair and undemocratic. There has been no adequate explanation as to why this policy should apply to our neighbourhood, given that the on-street permit parking program is designed for situations, as set out in Municipal Code 925-4, where insufficient parking exists and where the introduction of permit parking will not adversely affect roadway capacity, snow removal operations, or public safety. In our neighbourhood of 127 single-dwelling homes, each of which has their own driveways, we have sufficient parking available for our residents. Our residents have not asked for permanent parking, nor do they require it, as supported by the petition our neighbourhood submitted to Councillor Perks on September 6th. The proposed policy would exacerbate permit parking program inconsistencies in the city and within Toronto East York by allowing some residents to exercise their democratic right to polling while denying it for other residents. In June, this Council adopted item TE 7.78 for Councillor Matlow's ward, thereby allowing the previous bylaw process to remain in place to allow for direct local consultation with residents of his ward. Today, Councillor Bradford is making a similar request that an area of his ward also regain the right to polling. It is my understanding that at the outset, this policy review was requested by Toronto East York Community Council to reduce inconsistencies in on-street permit parking. Moving forward, we will have more inconsistencies. Some residents will be entitled to petition and polling, others won't. Some streets will with driveways will have on-street parking, others won't. Some wards, some parking zones will be tiny and encompass only a handful of streets, and others won't. They'll be mega zones. Toronto Transportation Services is already developing a citywide parking strategy, which has been raised by many of the former speakers. So I ask you then today, in what world do we live, in what country are we in, where some people have a right to vote for the conditions of their neighbourhoods and others don't? If we take a look at this map, you can see we are 5 little streets. The neighbourhood is bordered by a reverse ravine down to the Humber River. We've got then 2 hills on either side, and you can't get into the neighbourhood unless you access these hills. 3 out of the 5 streets in our area do not have sidewalks, so the extra berth on the road is required to keep pedestrians safe. That will disappear if you add cars to the street. Snow removal in our area is already problematic for our narrow streets, and the winter driving conditions in our neighbourhood are challenging because of the steep hills on Humbercrest and Humberview that feed into our neighbourhood. On November 19th, 2014, I don't know if you realize, but we had 2 car accidents at either entrance to the neighbourhood because you have to come down the hills to get into the neighbourhood. There were 12 car pileups on either end of it. I can send you the link if you need it. So it's dangerous. You need snow tires to get in and out. We need the width of the streets, and if you add cars to it, it makes it more challenging. Finally, the garbage collection would also be rendered extremely difficult for residents on streets that have no sidewalks and narrow lots, because when you add the parked car, it would be blocking the area where residents are currently putting out their garbage. So they'd either be blocking their driveway or they'd be there where the parked car should be. So our area, the former Ward 13, is a new part of the councillor's ward, and as such, substantially less time has been devoted to reviewing our neighbourhood's needs and geographic suitability for on-street parking compared with other areas of the city. Our concerns have been stated today and previously stated to Councillor Perks through emails, a petition, one-on-one meetings from numerous residents of our neighbourhood, and the attendance at the Ward 4 consultation meeting. Given the urgent concerns around pedestrian safety, traffic congestion and transportation, and climate change, I can't imagine that any councillor wants to attach themselves to a policy that is going to aggravate these issues.
I've tried to give everyone the same amount of time today. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? No? Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a deputation on this item? Okay, seeing none. Take it into committee. Questions of staff? Councillor Matlow.
Thank you. Through the chair, did city staff ever recommend that council prioritize the possibility of imposing permit parking on all wards or certain wards, or really any of this discussion that we've been having is, what was the origin of this?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The origin of this came from Toronto East York Community Council from a decision back at its meeting of October 6, 2015.
Has staff recommended that, rather than take actions like have been suggested to impose permit parking on neighborhoods throughout the Toronto and East York Community Council area, that we simply receive the information?
Responses to a series of reports since the original request on October the 6th was basically reporting back or providing information, responding to requests, and then seeking direction from Community Council.
If staff were directed to begin imposing permit parking on streets in even a handful of wards in the Toronto and East York Community Council, do you have the staff and resources to get that done this year? Or in the next 6 months, let's say?
It all depends on how many streets are being proposed to be included in the program.
Naturally, yeah.
The original reports did address that question. So in the original report, if all the streets within the Toronto and East York District area that are local in makeup were to be incorporated into the program, so they don't have permit parking, but we incorporate them.
Yeah.
We originally said it would be a 5-year phase-in with some additional resources being required. Okay, and that again is if we look at all the streets.
Do you have those resources now?
No, we don't have those resources now for a full-scale implementation of permit parking.
So we would be approving a direction to you to go do something before providing you with the tools to do it.
Well, it all depends on how many streets are being proposed to be incorporated. So our response would have to be geared to that.
Have you recommended that we impose permit parking on streets without, let me reframe that. Have you recommended that we cease allowing polls to be done on streets to consider whether or not there is support from the community for permit parking? Is that a staff recommendation?
That is not a staff recommendation. The responses and reports and the reports that we submitted since October 6, 2015 have simply been responses to questions, inquiries from Community Council.
Last couple of questions. When Community Council asked you to go out and consult with communities throughout the Toronto and East York Community Council area, what was the turnout to those meetings?
The community consultations that occurred were done through the public consultation unit. So the results of those consultations, there were 5 of them, I believe.
Yeah.
They're here in the report.
Can you just recall? Was there a big turnout? Was it just a handful of people?
The response. Attendance at the community meetings was fairly low. We did have a public survey that folks could, do electronically and provide feedback. So response rate was generally low to the surveys that were put out.
Do you think it's fair to say that if Community Council went ahead and did impose permit parking without doing polls and that happened, that there would be is it reasonable to say that there'd be a large number of people who would be surprised by that? That they would not have been adequately informed about that change?
I think there would be mixed reactions from the general public.
Thank you.
Those are your questions?
Yeah.
Yeah? Are there any further questions of staff? No? To speak? Councillor Matlow?
Thank you. Through Mr. Chair, I have a motion simply to receive this, which obviously means to be done with this conversation. And the reason I do this is for a couple of reasons. First of all, I fundamentally believe that consulting with our communities with respect to impactful changes on their streets is just a core part of our democracy. And especially when it has been baked into the process for so long. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, maybe we don't have polls on every single thing we do. But when the poll process was already there, and then we decide, you know, and how it often is felt, I think, on the ground is that from above, at City Hall, we're just deciding that we are wise and we know better than them, and we're just going to make a decision without asking them directly if this is a change that they would support. Through the poll process, I think it's just wrong, and this is why I moved the motion to receive, because I fundamentally disagree with removing that right now. I have heard some of my colleagues express, I think, some reasonable concerns around the process itself and the poll, and is that the best way to do it? And if that is our concern, then let's review how we engage our community and how we do it. Maybe there are better ways to do it. And even that can be a discussion with our communities about how best to ascertain the will of that street, the will of those residents, the will of that community. But I fundamentally disagree with just saying we've already decided for you, and I think that's the wrong approach. Moreover, I think given that staff haven't just not recommended this. I think that our staff need to be prepared for any major changes that we make with respect to the work that we are not only asking them to do, we're demanding that they do through a direction from Community Council. They don't have the resources. This isn't something that they have been wanting to do. We have remarkably talented and professional staff leading this program, and I would want to do far more work if we were going to make any major changes, working in concert with them to see how they would like to, what is their vision about expanding the program. But to do it in this way doesn't seem to me like good public policy. I want to say, just out of respect to my colleagues, as strongly as I feel about my position, I know that there are differing opinions that my colleagues feel very strongly about too. And I just want to say that for the record, because I don't want this to become a, sort of like, I'm right, you're wrong kind of thing. But I fundamentally believe that I'm right, or else I wouldn't say what I'm saying. And therefore, I do ask you to support my motion for receipt. And if we want to improve the way that we poll or engage the residents, let's focus our attention on improving democracy rather than, in my view, withdrawing some of the remaining tools of democracy that we have in our system. Thank you.
Why? Just, if I could ask a question of the mover, just to make sure, I'm trying to sort through a little procedural hiccup here. If you look at the recommendations in the staff report, the recommendations we have in the recommendations section, 1 and 2, are to receive one part of it and to receive another part of it. And I'm just wondering, given that that's what's there, what does your motion accomplish? I'm just trying to figure out, are you essentially moving the staff recommendations, or are you trying to do something different? Because I need to understand that just to work with the clerk to get the order of voting and all
I
of that.
appreciate that. What I'm, in all candor, what I'm trying to do
Yeah.
is avoid an opportunity for the potential passage of motions that could impose permit parking on neighborhoods in the Toronto and East Shore Community Council area. What I discussed with the
Fair enough. I heard the content of your speech. I'm trying to understand a different question. So, yes, it's quite possible that members of Community Council will move some motions. My intention is to move some of the motions in the body of the report. I'm asking you a different question. How is what you have moved different from 1 and 2? So that I can understand how to set up the votes.
Fair enough. What I'm doing is that I'm taking the entire update, but yes, the recommendations are to receive both of the lists. So I'm essentially moving the staff recommendations.
You're moving the staff recommendations.
Essentially moving them, yes.
See, this is the thing. We actually have to have clear direction.
Well, let me consult, if we can consult with the clerk, because I spoke with the clerk earlier about.
If your intention is to move the staff recommendations, that's great. If you're trying to achieve something else.
If I may ask your indulgence, because I asked the clerk earlier about that I wanted to receive it. Would the clerk suggest that by simply receiving the item, is that any different than moving the staff recommendations? Thank you. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. That's fair.
We're having a little conversation here about the meaning of words.
What did the clerk just say?
We will get to vote on everything. Don't you worry.
Recess for 2 seconds. People, just stay in your places. Thank you. Sorry, I don't think this is about parking. It's about a different, but we're just recessed for 1 second while the chair is dealing with a great TO issue, I think a housing issue, so hang on. Thank you. End of recess.
So, Councillor Matlow, the advice I've received from clerks is that the intention of staff was that if motions 1 and 2 in the staff report were adopted, that would be the end of it, and it would effectively be receipt. So I'm going to rule.
I've received the same advice.
I'm making a ruling that your motion to receive is redundant as a standalone motion, but I'm taking it as you moving the staff recommendation.
I concur, and I received the same
There we go.
advice.
So I just want to clarify. Can I
So
clarify?
I've
with
made a
you?
ruling,
Yes,
yeah.
I'm just
Okay.
clarifying that you're
Yes.
ruling that that is a redundant motion because it's a motion to receive, and
Yes.
instead you're letting Councillor Matlow move the staff recommendations in
Yes.
this report.
May I?
Got that right?
Yes.
Yes.
I have a point of order, though.
Okay.
I concur. That's the same advice that I've received from staff.
Yes.
If I may, can I look to the clerk through chair? The one confusion that I have is that if I move a motion to receive the item.
Yes.
Okay. And if that would come first,
So yes, it does affect
Right.
the order of voting,
yeah.
yes.
So if that would come first,
Yes.
and then there would be no motions, and if that's approved, obviously, hypothetically.
No, so to be clear, right, there are two things you're saying there. The first is, if staff hadn't made the recommendations they made, and you moved a motion to receive, your motion to receive would be the first in the series of votes that we did should something else be moved. If I may, I'm not finished. However, to be very clear, if you make the motion to receive, if staff hadn't given this advice, that doesn't bring the debate to a conclusion. Members of the Community Council are still in a position in either interpretation to make additional motions that would still be voted on.
So just to clarify, so there would be absolutely no difference if I move a motion to.
He's moved his motion first, so
No. Yes, so
wouldn't stop the debate.
it's not identical. To be clear, a motion to receive does not stop the debate. However, because the staff have placed receive this and receive that, and you are therefore effectively moving the staff recommendations, councillors can move amendments to the staff recommendations, such as deleting those and replacing them instead. So because of the way the staff worded this, and you can't effectively move a receipt, you can't have the receipt vote first.
So it would be, you're saying that it would be redundant?
Yes, I've ruled that it's redundant because this is the advice we already have from staff. So you're moving the staff recommendations.
Okay, that's your ruling.
Okay, good. No.
Why don't promote that? No.
Yeah, okay, so good. We're all tidy and clear. So you've moved the staff recommendations. Fair enough? Okay, very good. Other speakers? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, I will keep it short. I'd like to move alternative recommendation number 3 to conduct the polling process in the locations identified. Speak to this very briefly. I think that the context matters. I think the way that our streets and our neighborhoods have evolved certainly needs to be considered in this process. I think the democratic process matters. And I think that local residents have a better, more thorough understanding of their street and how it operates than politicians or bureaucrats at City Hall. And they should be consulted in that process when it comes to on-street permit parking. We have a process in place. I recognize that it's not a perfect process, but if you don't like that process, perhaps TUI should put its efforts to changing that process rather than unilaterally slapping down permit parking on all these streets. So that's my position. I choose the democratic route here. I want to poll the residents in the zoned areas and would encourage the rest of my colleagues to do the same. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I have a couple of motions that I have turned into the clerk. One is I'd like to have staff let me know how many appeals there were for permit parking in Ward 14 that were turned down.
Do you mean parking pads?
Parking pads, I'm sorry.
Very good.
Yeah, you mean parking pad appeals.
Okay.
And recalling, and the second is I would actually like to know about the current parking enforcement with no permit parking. And apparently there's a pilot in Scarborough where they are starting in Scarborough actively checking to make sure that people aren't overnight or determining how many people are using those streets. And I'll speak briefly about both of them. One is number 2. I know from being here for a while that going back to Councillor Busson and then Councillor McMahon and now Councillor Bradford, the kind of discussions that go on between residents on one side of the Scarborough border and the Toronto East York border, because one side has permit parking and the other doesn't, yet Torontonians are noticing that there's a lot of freebies overnight on those streets. That's the first one. And secondly, I sat here and had many people come forward to get a pad parking because they could not get permit parking on their street. And that is really driving a lot of my thinking here. Someone who on a street in East York wanted to have permit pad, she got turned down, but because the street didn't want permit parking, they had nowhere else to park. So this is, I'm not doing pad parking. If people need a place to park, the streets are very convenient. They're paid for, they're paved already. And that is, apparently this motion has the clerk's or legal really in a state, so I'm sure they're going to try to change something. But that's my thinking. And this has gone on for 3 years. I'm very confident that everybody knows about this or has heard about this because it has been in the newspaper, it has been talked about, it has been a subject of a consultation, which people were, thousands and thousands and thousands of flyers were dropped. I can't make people go to a meeting, but it was really a big issue for them. They would be there. As we know, with any housing meeting or anything else that takes place, including the discussion today for the project in Councillor Bailau's ward. So hundreds of people are involved in that. So I think we should just proceed with this. I want to make it easier to have a safety valve for people that need a place to put their vehicle. Thank you. And if there's a problem with that motion, I'd like to know.
I think I've tidied it up.
Thank you.
Okay. So just for those who are curious about the flurry, it was pointed out that the police enforce permit parking. However, that doesn't matter because we're not asking for a change in permit parking. We're asking for staff to report on what they're doing. And certainly transportation staff can tell us what the police are up to.
Well, that's exactly right. So I'm surprised there was a.
So I'm going to rule those in
because
order.
I certainly know that that's who does that, and they should be, they can let everyone know about their pilot, and they can let everybody know about the number of tickets, and that's what I'm expecting.
All good.
Thank you.
Yes.
Of the mover?
Yes, thank you very much. Just to further clarify and to help me understand, are you drawing a correlation between property owners' concerns and sometimes objections to parking pads, the desire to have parking pads on the street, and at the same time objecting to permit parking on the street? Are you drawing a correlation between?
Well, I think I just would like to know, because I'm unclear, but having sat here and had someone speak to us and say, I can't park on the street on a little, and it wasn't an arterial, it was a local street, because it's up to the rest of the street to put permit parking on the street. So if I have to make a choice, I would like to make that street available rather than people applying for parking pads and being turned down or paving front yards, Councillor.
And is the implication that puts yourself as a local councillor in very difficult situation when you have a local community that says, we don't want to have front yard parking, but we also don't want you to put any on-street parking onto the street, because I'm taking care of, I have a driveway.
That's correct.
Or I have parking, or I have a garage.
Yes, and I have parking, but I don't want that on this street, so that the majority, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's fair to make this change.
And is the intention to, and I recognize that the motion is gone, but the intention is to take a look at everything that's contained in Ward 14, and is it your hope that you're going to reveal a pattern of applications and appeals around parking pad requests, and correlating what is actually permitted with on-street parking? Is that the intention? Are you expecting to see a trend here?
Well, I'd like to see what it is and how many people have been unable to get pad parking that were also unable to have street parking, because this would actually fix their conundrum and my conundrum in bringing that forward. Sometimes they get turned down just downstairs already, and I don't think that's really fair since the street's there.
And then to ask a question about your second portion of the motion, for streets that don't have permit parking, but you may have visitors that are staying overnight, and in some neighborhoods where you have these sort of Airbnb party houses and everyone is staying overnight, it's rather difficult to get parking enforcement into a particular residential neighborhood where you don't have active, ongoing parking enforcement. Is that correct?
Yes, parking enforcement, as you may or may not know, I don't know your ward, is directed primarily for permit parking areas because it's easy and simple to drive up and down those streets and tag the cars without the permits. And as I understand it, there's very little enforcement on streets without that. I had not thought about the Airbnb where a lot of people descend on a street. Plus, if you have a visitor, you know, we have a permit parking visitor stipulation. If you have your mother-in-law, father-in-law, sister-in-law, anybody coming into town, they can park on that street without worrying about a ticket. For $5, they can have a permit. And I think it just makes the streets far more accessible for many things and controllable by traffic enforcement.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Question of the mover? Yeah, Councillor Matlow.
I kept looking for where you were going to move forward with imposing permit parking, and I couldn't find it in the item. So I just want to be very clear that you're supportive of receiving the report, but these are simply asking for information and reports, like more information.
Asking for information. I will once I see what that pad parking appeals look like.
I have to intervene here with a little bit of procedural advice. When we are considering motions and the staff recommendation was to receive, if any motion passes, that motion then becomes the advice to council or the direction to staff, and the item is not received. If anything passes, the item is not received. Okay? Received means take no action. If we take any action, the item is not received.
I'm actually aware of that.
Okay. Well, the question you asked the councillor was, if these pass, does she still support receipt? And she can't do that.
Well, well, again, adopt 1 and 2. Yeah, but then you are asking for information. For what?
For information requests that I'm...
Just information requests.
That's correct.
And, okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just clarify your question of the mover, I guess?
Yeah.
So 1 and 2 on page 4 of the report, this is not directing, it says City Council amend Schedule B of the Toronto Municipal Code chapter to incorporate the new and revised permit parking areas. So would this not be direction to introduce permit parking areas as outlined on attachment A?
I think it's just information about what's going on, which I've been unable to get until, yeah, same one. Oh, the pad parking, yeah, I'd like to know about that.
Some members of my community might remember when I met with them, I told them this was an enormously complex issue. Here you go. Okay. We have some clarity, and maybe I can ask the clerks to reword Councillor Fletcher's first recommendation. Her intention, and I'll ask her to verify this, is to adopt recommendations 1 and 2 from the body of the report.
Correct.
Okay? Not 1 and 2 in the staff recommendations. So just adjust one at a time. I'll recognize you in a moment. Yeah. So are you going to correct? Will you correct that?
I want this information.
Okay, so we will fix that then. So essentially,
This gives us the right to install?
No, it installs.
It installs it.
Okay. So, members, we have a further clarification, and my apologies. My apologies on this. This has been an enormously complex process. 3 years' work with a variety of different points of view about how to proceed. I want everyone to understand the result of Councillor Fletcher's motion, because it will also be the result of what I move for my ward, and what Councillor Bailao intends to do, I understand as well. So, and this I think is also part of the reason that the report took so long to get to us. We had originally anticipated a couple months ago. The advice I have received from staff is that because this is not a delegated authority, but rather something that requires an amendment to the bylaw, the process is we pass these motions, such as the one Councillor Fletcher has moved. City Council then considers whether or not to amend the bylaw to allow that to happen. And then, where we have temporarily amended the bylaw to allow Toronto East York Community Council to install without polling, we will have to have a subsequent vote at Toronto East York Community Council to direct staff to go implement what City Council has permitted us to do. Did you all follow that? I personally have a headache. But anyway, okay. Are there any further questions of the mover? We all know what we're doing now. Yes, yes. And the clerk is correcting the words. Yeah. Maybe it's alternate, maybe it's.
so I did it at the City Council and then Toronto East York Community Council. This is separate. You see, the problem I'm having now is you have City Council.
I want that to be.
Yes. Well, we're just going to have to do our best, okay?
Okay.
All right. Okay. Any further questions of Councillor Fletcher? No. Anyone else want to speak? Councillor Bailao.
The same recommendations.
Oh,
The alternate recommendations in the body of the report to install the permit parking.
2 and 3, yeah.
So this is for my ward, right? We all have to move individually? Yeah.
Ward 9.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm moving on for Ward 14.
Why don't you speak to your motion while they add in the words "as it pertains to Ward 9"?
Okay, so I ask for your support. I have 97% of my ward that pays permit parking, and there's about 3 to 5% that doesn't pay permit parking. I did have a community consultation, and I explained what I thought was a fair argument that, you know, everybody is paying their taxes and being part of the same community, but also we talked about some practical issues. So actually some of the people that lived on those streets, because there's only a few of them and they live very close to streets that have permit parking, what ends up happening is that they don't have parking when they come home because people that don't want to pay for permit parking end up all parking on their streets. So I actually had a number of residents that lived on those streets that were quite happy because they said, we want to be able to get home and have our permit parking. That because there's only a small number of them and they're surrounded by streets that have permit parking, everybody that didn't have a permit parking ended up parking on only those streets, and that was causing some issues for those residents. And so there was mixed feelings, but I think by the end of the meeting, everybody agreed that this was the direction that we were going to go, and I think reluctantly they supported this, so I'll be moving this into my direction. Also understanding that, you know, we're always looking for sources of revenue here in the city, and obviously we can use these sources and have equitable services for everybody across the city.
All right. Any questions of the mover? Yes.
And I apologize for this. I just need to clarify. For, I think, Councillor Cressy, Councillor Layden, and myself, we would like to proceed with recommendation number 2 in the staff report, considering Councillor Bailao's motion specifically references...
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask him.
Considering Councillor Bailao's motion specifically references Ward 9 and Councillor Fletcher's motion specifically references Ward 14, I just want to clarify, does anyone need to, does one of the downtown councillors need to move recommendation number 2 out of the staff report?
So
Or is that still
Councillor
before us?
Matlow moved the staff recommendations. They are now in front of
They're
us.
still in front of us, okay.
The motions moved by Councillor Bailao,
That's already
Councillor
helpful as
Fletcher,
answer.
and myself will make the staff recommendation number 1 redundant.
Yeah, understood. Okay.
Unless somebody moves something specifically pertaining to 11, 13,
We understand.
Or
I understand.
10,
I just want to verify because I think Councillor Fletcher's
then
motion didn't...
we simply receive the report as pertaining to those wards. Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No? Okay. I guess anyone else to speak? Councillor Wong Tam?
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to just recognize that this is a very complicated situation. And when it comes to parking on streets or parking period, or driving through streets in a very fast manner, there's always the potential for conflict and very stressful conversations. And I think it's important for us to recognize that throughout the city, there's a different there's a different tonality in every single neighborhood. Having represented Midtown right up to Moore Park and Summerhill and Rosedale, and a very urban, most urban part of the city, I can tell you that neighbors from the north, from neighbors from the south, they had very different opinions on who should be allowed on their street. And one of the reasons why in Ward 13 I'd like to sort of have receive the staff report at this particular point in time is because most of the downtown streets that I now represent, we have green P parking. So you are not really going to be able to implement on-street parking for overnight permit unless we actually do something dramatically different with the green P parking. So that's our way of sharing with everyone across the city who comes into our neighborhood an opportunity to park on the street when you need to. So we do a significant amount of sharing. We think that it's the way to build vibrant, inclusive commercial districts. It also doesn't mean that we don't have residential streets where there are low rises, townhomes, detached homes, and we still are able to try to make it work. It's not easy. But to balance the needs of the entire community, including the interests of visitors to our area, it is oftentimes extremely delicate. And for us to make any significant changes right now, I know that I haven't done the deeper work of working with my community to make those changes. And even if we had, to be quite honest, there's no way, I'm pretty confident about this, there's no way we would ever arrive to a consensus. It just would not happen. So if we were to take a look at their streets and to make sure that we are able to share them and that there is equitable access and that we're able to provide people who require accommodations, especially those who are living with disabilities, some priority access on those streets, that would probably be the very best that we can do. I have new neighborhoods such as Regent Park, which is not technically new, but going through massive revitalization. 69 acres of this community has been completely and will be at some point completely revitalized. There is not any permit parking on those streets. And I believe that there should be, but we're not even able to get to that conversation yet because there needs to be a lot of socializing of the idea. There needs to be some education about providing that to the local community, and that's work that just has to be done. And that's important for people to note, is that these conversations are not straightforward, they're not easy, but I also am very confident that local councillors do the very best that they can to try to balance these diverse opinions and needs, and oftentimes they are blamed for everything. And to be quite honest, they're simply just doing their job, and I want to just acknowledge that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you've moved no motions, so no questions of you. I'll speak. So I'm going to be moving the really complicated motion that Councillor Fletcher moved and Councillor Bailão moved as it pertains to Ward 4. As it pertains to Ward 4. There you go. See, at the end of... Okay, good. All right, thank you. So, it's a lively conversation. This has been 4 years. 4 years of going back and forth with different approaches and a lot of conflict. And I wanted to speak to some of the ideas that have been presented here today in this conversation. The first is, I think it's very important to remember that our roadway network is a public good. It is not the property of the people who reside on a particular street. It is not the property of the people in a particular community or a particular ward. It is something we all build together for each other. And further, it is only of value in as much as it connects to every other public street. If you can't walk to, bike to, or drive to one street in the city of Toronto to another, the network has failed. So we must never think of each of these streets as being the domain or preserve of the people on a particular block or a particular street, because it is a public good whose value lies in the fact of it being a citywide network. Imagine, for example, if the property owners along Bloor decided that because they wanted to put a particular treatment on their street, say grass from curb to curb. Instantly, you have no way of traveling along Bloor. That shows the absurdity of trying to imagine individual pieces of the public good, which is the roadway network, as being the preserve of a particular neighborhood. Further, I would challenge the notion that in allowing people on a particular block a polling right, that we are somehow being more democratic. These streets are, again, the property of everyone who lives and resides in or is visiting the City of Toronto. They are a public good, like the air we breathe, like our sewer system, like the lake shore, like the electricity system, like all of the public goods that are networks that we all share. And we never allow a small group of citizens to say, I am asserting a right over that public good for my local benefit only. That's a position I've taken every time this issue has come, and it's one I will take every time it comes in the future. Public goods, which are shared networks, must be preserved in that way. And I reject further the idea that the polling system somehow is a fair way of dealing with that. The people in the City of Toronto elect a mayor and council to manage those networks, manage those public goods, and only when council feels like it do we create a bylaw which says go poll. But the right to make the decision whether or not to poll rests with the democratically elected representatives who sit on council. It is never an automatic right. It is never a democratic right. It is a tool that some members of council think we should use to better coordinate the input in decision making. It's no different than a community meeting. It's no different than going to focus tables when we do a development application. It's a tool for helping us to understand input. It has never been the law of the land that any group of citizens are able to determine a piece of public network or a public good by a popular referendum locally. That's not what these are. So I want to be very clear, and that's why I have always fought to eliminate the polling provisions in our various bylaws. I think they create a false expectation on the part of the community just that somehow suggest that this little piece of the road, it's your right to decide whether there's a speed bump. It's your right to decide whether or not your neighbor has a parking pad. It's your right to decide whether or not there is permit parking. I think it's a misleading and false understanding. It's also not a voting system that is in any way monitored for fairness the way an election is. Finally, on the substantive issue of permit parking, one of the pieces of due diligence that I did when we were considering Ward 4 is I and my staff actually went out and looked at all the streets in question. And we looked at them overnight during the period when the 3-hour parking rule is not eligible, right? And guess what? In every single instance, we found cars parked on those streets. People are currently parking on these streets in violation of our parking rules. It's not very effectively enforced, but the system we have now, and Councillor Fletcher spoke to this, effectively says, go ahead, Torontonians, be scofflaws. That is our parking system. And it's a parking system, it's a system of relating to our citizens which I reject utterly and in every instance. We could, if we were interested simply in revenue, just start dinging everyone with parking tickets, more and more and more. And we could increase the fines, and it would all be great. Except it's saying those people who have the ability to pay a parking fine and have that not be a meaningful amount of money, go ahead. That's your system. People who would have trouble paying those fines, too bad for you. It's inequitable, it's unjust. And finally, on the point of climate change, which was raised in several instances, we have to remember that you only get a permit to park in a permit street if you own a car. If people in these neighborhoods feel that we should not have cars as part of our transportation network for climate change reasons, don't buy a car. So those are my remarks.
With the, actually, never.
We have a number of motions. Oh, no. Okay, so what have we got first? Councillor Bradford?
Yeah.
We have his motions first. We could have those up. All right. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Next. Councillor Fletcher? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Oh, sorry. Do I need to check? Okay, so I'll take it. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Okay. Next. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries.
So are you opposed to that or in favor? Just opposed to my area. I get it.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Okay. Item is amended, and members, be clear that this means that for Ward 11, 13, and 10, we are adopting the staff recommendation to take no action on those wards. Okay? All right. So on the item as amended, all those in favor?
Recorded.
You want this recorded? Yep. Councillor Cressy, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Perks, Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor Layton. All those opposed? Councillor Bradford, Councillor Matlow. Thank you very much. What else have we got to do?
Oh, actually, there's residential demolition, if we can get that.
Which one?
It's number 17.
Okay, members, we have item 17 now.
I just have one.
That's okay.
No, it's 7.
No, he moved to defer 17.
Hang on, it's 16.
Item 16.
Yeah,
Item 16.
all of them signed, yeah. There's,
I think I've got 15.
hold on, just one second.
Wait, sorry, we've been bouncing around a
I
bit.
lost my sheet, just one second. Oops, I wasn't expecting to move so quick after that. Okay, sorry. We've done the first page. Yeah, it's number 15.
Okay, item 15. If I could have just if everybody at the back of the room, Mary, could you just, if you're having a conversation, could you take it outside? Because we still have business to conduct. Item 15. Residential demolition application 1 Peel Avenue. Councillor Bailao.
Move the alternate recommendation.
So the alternate recommendation is to approve with conditions?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Next.
Next would be, I think it's 32 we never did. Councillor Layton, I think. 32.
Item 32, Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. I've been desperately trying to get in contact with the applicant for this, but unfortunately I've been unable to today. So I have a deferral motion, but also requesting that staff just come back with a recommendation on making making a loading zone rather than the parking area.
Okay.
Give us two clear options.
All right. All those in favor, opposed, carried.
And then on to 44, but you also have to add the two people.
Okay. We'll do 44 first. Item 44, Toronto East York Collector Road speed limit strategy or speed limit reductions as part of a Vision Zero speed management strategy. Councillor Cressy.
I have an amendment.
You have an amendment.
Can be placed on the screen. Let's add a bunch more streets. Just a couple.
And all, just these are all in Ward 10?
Yep.
Okay.
All in Ward 10. Just doing them all.
All right. Do you want to speak on that?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Yeah, we're reducing them to 30 in all, for all of them.
Okay. I've heard your point. Yes. Okay, we're running out of things to do. Okay, members, can I just have a vote to hold this?
And
How soon,
so do I.
Councillor Wong Tam, how soon will you have it? Okay. While you look at that, I'm going to ask Councillor Layton to speak.
Is to take the streets that are, the collectors that are recommended to go to 40, to take them to 30 kilometers an hour. In Ward, what ward am I again? 11. Like Lennox Street from Palmerston to Bathurst. It's got speed humps and alternating side parking. How is it ever 50? Like 50, really?
Hang on a minute. Hang on. I'm sorry. I need to recess for 3 minutes. Okay? Very sorry. There's a bit of a mix-up between the offices, and those guys are happy to put this all off to January so that we can do all of it all at once. Is that all right with you guys? Yeah. Yeah? All right, okay. So I'll wait for Councillor Mallory.
I just told my community we're doing this, but that's okay.
I know, but there was a breakdown in communication.
I know.
No, I'm going to move that it gets deferred to January so that we have a coherent set of undeliverable, impossible instructions for Vince all at the same time.
I think then I have something that is new business that was related to this report then, that it's the Old Weston Road. Can I do you guys, but I would like to do it then.
Or you want to do it in January?
No, because the report recommended Old Weston Road from Westport to Davenport, and I'm just adding all the way to Rogers. So I just want to make sure that we do all of, well,
Where are you adding? Is that a new business or is that an emotion you intended to?
no, I think it's new business. They told us that it was new business. We were told that it needed to be new business. No, no, it's speed reduction. Yeah, you do, you do. Yep.
73. So it was circulated as 73. We can either just vote on it as a standalone item, or you can withdraw it, or whatever you want to do.
No, can I just amend it to make sure that it's from Rogers to Westport? So that one says that it's from Rogers to, and Lavender. Okay, let me, okay, just,
So, I call the meeting back to order. I'm just having a day today. I'm just loving being the chair. I can't think of anything that would make me happier. Boy, oh boy, I like doing this.
Doing a great job.
I am going to move to defer item 44 to the January meeting of Toronto East York Community Council. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Yep.
There was.
So what can I do now?
well,
So we need to do the rest of the new business.
One sec, just. Okay, sign that.
So from 72 to 75 hasn't been done.
So I need to,
Yeah, 72 to 75.
have they been introduced?
I think you just did.
Okay, so item 71 or 72?
Just check my container for the draft. There's nothing in there now. Okay. Yeah, so they have to be done. They've been introduced.
So
but they have to be
71
dealt with.
first or
70
72?
Sorry, just 1 second. It starts 72 to 75.
72. Okay, so next we will go to item 72, which was a letter from somebody. I don't have a 72. Oh, here we go. Councillor Bailao, new business request, parking amendment Gladstone Avenue and Shanley Street. So you move the recommendations in the letter, I assume?
yep,
Okay, so all those in favor of moving of the recommendations in the letter? All opposed? Carried.
So do you want to jump over 73 to 75?
We're going to go to 74 for a moment. It is, I don't know who wrote this letter.
It's Councillor Cressy and
Councillors Layton and Cressy. New business request for a Chinatown study, Spadina Avenue and Dundas Street West. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Layton. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Members, I have a revised item 75, new business item, parking amendments and all-way stop control, Paul Lane Gardens. Councillor Cressy.
Move the recommendations in my letter.
So he thinks we should vote in favor of the recommendations of the letter. All those in favor, opposed, carried. 76 has not been. So I need a motion to introduce item 76. Councillor Bailao, why don't you move that? All those in favor, opposed, carried. On item 76, which is a new business request, parking amendments, encroachment agreement, 365-367 Osler Street.
move recommendations.
Okay, all those in favor of the recommendations in the letter? Opposed, carried.
We're going to debate that one.
Yeah, 67.
So item 67?
67 and
Okay.
we're waiting for,
Councillor Wong Tam, item 67, let me just read it.
and then Councillor Bilal.
Item TE 1167, realignment of permit parking area 6G to exclude 203 Jarvis Street. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to move the recommendations contained in my letter.
All those in favor, opposed, carried.
So now your last item is 72.
Yeah, but let's
So we are, instead of saying from,
the item we're doing is TE 1173.
that asked for a speed
I have to just say
reduction.
what it is. It's the way we do things. New business request speed limit reduction, Old Weston Road, Davenport Road to Lavender Road.
Can I amend it to make sure that it says from Westport Avenue to Lavender?
I need it in the recommendation, though. How do I fit it in?
Reduce the speed limit on Old Weston Road between Westport Avenue.
Okay, and Lavender Road?
And Lavender Road.
Perfect, okay.
Okay, so we'll treat that as a revised,
So just, we'll do a little motion.
or can we just treat it as a revised?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll fix it in the system, it's okay. Westport Avenue, okay.
Okay, Councillor Bilal, do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favor of doing that? All those opposed? We now have some bills.
She goes first. And Councillor Bilal, would you go second?
Councillor Wong Tam, you have a motion.
Yes, I do, that the Toronto and East Shore Community Council pass and declare as bylaws Bills 1679, 1684 to 1696, and 1698 to 1703, prepared for the December 3rd, 2019 meeting 11 of Community Council.
All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Councillor Bilal, you have a motion.
That the Toronto and East Shore Community Council pass and declare as a bylaw a confirmatory bill to confirm the legislative proceedings of the Toronto and East Shore Community Council acting under delegated authority at meeting 11 on December 3rd, 2019.
All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. That concludes our business. Everyone have themselves a great evening.